Chapter 1596. Wei Wei Bai sneered and rolled her eyes at him. You're so hypocritical. You only know how to lie all day. I hate men like you who are full of schemes the most. Ning Zhouma's smug expression froze. He turned back and looked at Wei Wei Bai coldly. He saw her leaning against the chair. She looked cute, but her expression was infuriatingly cold. You really know how to make things difficult for me. Without me scheming in fear, I don't know how many times I would have died. Wei Wei Bai didn't have much sincerity. As long as you're happy. Anyway, when I become the crown prince, I must release my husband. She really believed what he said. She was weak all over, but her head was still raised high. Her eyes were full of hope, and her face was as pink as a glutinous rice ball. It was as if she felt that her husband was a fool. He was a tumor that needed to be removed. Ning Zhouma suddenly flung his sleeves and walked forward. He lowered his head and looked into her eyes. Do you care so much about him? Wei Wei Bai, are you an old woman? I'm tired of always asking the same question. You can sleep now. If you don't sleep, you'll drag your body down. It was the time when she came and went and only knew how to care about him. She didn't even think about whether he was nervous or not. He was going to face a bunch of wolves, tigers, and leopards tomorrow. Ning Zhouma was nervous. Even his palms were sweaty. In this perilous palace, the moment he stepped out, he would be a target. But she was heartless and thought that he was a fool. They could be together forever. Ning Zhouma suddenly reached out and grabbed her limp body, lifting her up directly. Then, he threw her onto the bed. Anyway, who didn't know about their relationship? Even if he was a fool, he still cared about her so much that they slept in the same room at night. Not to mention, there was no filth. Others would think that she was the one in bed with him. That's right, she was. Ning Zhouma pressed her onto the bed. His black hair fell on her body, and his breathing was messy and heavy. Wei Wei Bai raised her hand, suddenly twisted his arm and sat on top of him. What are you doing? She had already lost all of her strength, and this action had drained all of her strength. Ning Zhouma didn't know what he was going to do. He looked straight at her and saw that her eyes were so clear that he could see the bottom. There was no color that was difficult to understand in the court. People like him wouldn't even know how they died. His cold eyes were filled with ferocious aggression, and his tone was no longer polite. Go down. Wei Wei Bai sneered, so be it. Who wants to sleep with you? Her limbs were weak, and she struggled to move her body. When that soft body moved, it was like a fire, rubbing against his skin and creating a sea of fire. Ning Zhouma's body stiffened. However, Wei Wei Bai didn't even look at him as she got off the bed with one foot. Just as her foot touched the ground, she was pressed back down by Ning Zhouma. Wei Wei Bai struggled away. She pushed him away weakly, grabbing and pinching him. Get away from me. What are you doing? Ning Zhouma was also sullen. He didn't say anything with a cold face, and he grabbed her hand tightly. It was as if he wanted to grab hold of something. The two people's breaths intertwined, and the ambiguous temperature slowly rose. Sweat dripped from Bai Weiwei's forehead, slid down to her chin, and then fell under that hidden white neck, leaving behind a trace of charm and gentleness. Ning Zhouma was just angry that he wanted to subdue Wei Wei Bai. Chapter 1597. Burn, 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 and everything will be over. Damn it, this red line didn't just make it unable to walk properly. The side mission was stuck because of the existence of the red line. It didn't have enough memory. If it didn't break this thing, it would have to cut 100 times every time in the future. Would it still be able to live? Oh right, what did the host do to have a favorability of 55? The system thought for a moment. Sell her body. Sigh, the host had fallen. Back then, she was so pure that she had to haggle over how many favorability points to sell for her first kiss. Now, there didn't seem to be any difference from back then. After all, after selling her body, she still haggled over how many favorability points to sell. So its host was indeed as pure as ever from the beginning to the end. After the system finished its teasing, it continued to burn the red line. When it returned to reality, it would burn that fortune teller even if it risked being punished. What kind of material was it made of? It was so tough. The night passed and the morning light shone into the room. Ning Jioma opened his eyes. There was a soft warmth in his arms. He lowered his head. Wei Wei Bai was curled up in his arms. His eyes softened and he slowly reached out to stroke her cheek. He wasn't completely open to her. But he could trust her. Because she was the person with the least ambition in the palace. Only people with no ambition would not be tainted. Ning Jioma slowly got up and covered her with the blanket. He dressed himself in a set of stone-green robes and tied his hair with a jade crown. His movements were standard and smooth. How long had it been? Such a normal and natural process. He hadn't experienced it for many years. Ning Jioma recalled the time when he was the crown prince. It was a beautiful period of time. With power in hand, it was extremely sweet. Ning Jioma took out the medicine to suppress the poison. He opened the bottle and poured out one pill. The red pill rolled in the center of his fair palm. He looked at it coldly and then swallowed it. A eunuch outside the door said respectfully, "Your Highness, Her Majesty requests an audience with you." Ning Jioma's lips curled up coldly. His voice became timid and scared. I understand." It sounded like he was forcing himself to be calm, but when others heard it, they knew. He was still that foolish King Ning. Ning Jioma stood up and was about to leave. A puzzled voice suddenly came from behind. "Your Highness." Ning Jioma paused, but he didn't turn back. Wei Wei Bai's voice seemed to tremble. Was it him yesterday? She thought he was the fool last night. So when he hugged her, she didn't resist and even took the initiative. It was so sweet that it seeped into one's bones. It was even more intoxicating than power. There was a reason why there were so many incapable rulers in history. Ning Jioma's breathing paused for a while before he finally gritted his teeth and said, "It's your fault. I don't care about a woman like you. Just looking at you makes me want to grow a needle in my eye." Behind him, the sound of her breathing became soft and ragged. It was a relief of joy. Ning Jioma snorted. "You better hope that I can succeed. If that fool wakes up, remember to ask him to pretend to be me." After saying that, he didn't look at her and hurriedly walked to the door as if he was afraid that he would waver. He had just stepped over the threshold. Wei Wei Bai's voice came from behind. "Your Highness, everything is going well." Such a rustic and useless way of encouraging. Did she think he was a 3-year-old child? Ning Jioma couldn't help but look back, only to see Wei Wei Bai sitting on the bed with her long hair draped over her shoulders. She was wrapped in a blanket, revealing a pink face with a pure smile. Chapter 1598. His heart suddenly skipped a beat. Ning Jioma's breathing quickened as he hurriedly turned around and left. It was as if there was a fox chasing after him. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 60. Ning Jioma went out with a confused look on his face, as if he didn't know where he was going. A trace of darkness flashed in the eyes of the eunuch who came to pick him up. He lowered his head and respectfully extended his hand. He helped Ning Jioma into the palanquin. Ning Jioma said to him in a low voice, "Xing Mao, send our people to see Ah Wei, and then, bring her to me. He didn't want to bring her along. But he didn't know why, but when he went to the imperial court to recover his mind and even his appearance, he actually wanted her to see him. Ning Jiumo didn't know why he would do such a superfluous thing. Zheng Mao, who was Ning Jiumo's confidant who squatted under the window every day, said in a low voice, "Yes, Your Highness." Ning Jiumo lowered his head and hid his cold eyes under a silly and confused expression. Then he got into the palanquin. In the imperial court, the emperor sat on the dragon chair tiredly, but his eyes were glowing with excitement. Heavenly Master Lin said that Ning Jiumo was very likely to be the benefactor for him to pursue immortality. The Heavenly Master had already set up an array formation in the imperial court. As long as Ning Jiumo entered the array formation, if he was the benefactor, he would be transformed into a new person. Then, he would be reborn. All the hardships of the past would disappear, and he would become a completely new person. The Heavenly Master even said that Ning Jiumo would face so many disasters. It was all for him. Because the Emperor pursued immortality, which was against the heavens would punish him severely. And Ning Jiumo was his benefactor. So he bore the calamity of the Emperor and became a fool. When the Emperor heard this, he felt that it made sense. Originally, Ning Jiumo was very talented and intelligent, very similar to him. But later, Consort Ro was framed and died in the cold palace. And this intelligent son of his had also become stupid and disfigured. At that time, he was already pursuing immortality. So Ning Jiumo's theory of resisting misfortune was correct. If Ning Jiumo was really his benefactor, he would definitely need him on his path to immortality. Because Ning Jiumo could bear the calamity for him. The Emperor did not feel guilty at all because he was the Emperor. Everything in the world belonged to him. It was Ning Jiumo's good fortune to bear the disaster for him. Ning Jiumo alighted from the palanquin and slowly walked into the imperial court. In just a few days, the imperial court was transformed into a complex and absurd array. It was like an altar. None of the kneeling courtiers made a sound. After all, the emperor was muddle-headed. Most of them relied on flattery to get to the top. No matter how the emperor messed around, they would comply. His footsteps paused, and his body shrank down. His shoulders collapsed, and he cowered in fear, looking like a fool. Ning Jiumo saw the emperor sitting on the throne and looking at him with a strange gentleness. I summoned you here because I have something for you to do. Ning Jiumo looked at him blankly, as if trying to figure out who he was. His disfigured face looked even uglier after his hair was combed back. The emperor and some of the ministers averted their eyes in disgust. It was so ugly. Could he really be reborn? The eunuch beside the emperor said in a sharp voice, "The prince is here. Why aren't you kneeling down?" Ning Jiumo staggered and immediately knelt down. He didn't know what to say and just knelt and trembled. The emperor saw his silly appearance and was a little uninterested. He said to a middle-aged man dressed as a Taoist beside him, "Let's begin, Taoist master." To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the bookmark. Chapter 1599. Heavenly Master Lin nodded and flicked his fly whisk. He chanted a bunch of mysterious words, then reached out and the array emitted a hazy white light. Everyone widened their eyes. How did this happen? Ning Jiumo, who was in the white light, suddenly twitched violently. He broke out in cold sweat as if he was struggling with something. Heavenly Master Lin said coldly, "This is a rebirth. If he is really your Majesty's benefactor, then he will survive. If not, then he will die." This sentence was very cold. The emperor smiled happily and said, "I am very lucky to have Heavenly Master Lin." Heavenly Master Lin had a sly look in his eyes. Ning Jiumo, who was in the array, lowered his head and sneered. Wei Wei Bai was led by the eunuch, Zheng Yi, to the door of the imperial court and squatted there. She looked at the eunuch strangely. "Why did you bring me here?" Zheng Yi said, "His Highness is out. We have to bring him back." Wei Wei Bai nodded and didn't say anything. The system was still broadcasting the scene of Ning Jiumo and Heavenly Master Lin swindling the Emperor. "Why is it glowing?" The system said, "It's a special powder. A small flame can make it like this." Wei Wei Bai watched with relish. Ning Jiumo's shaking is quite artistic. The system said, "It's not much different from the village dancing gods." Wei Wei Bai felt the same. It was just that the setting was better. In fact, she felt that Ning Jiumo's stupidity might be hereditary. Didn't you see the Emperor's stupidity? They were all products of the same gene. Maybe Ning Jiumo shouldn't be looking for an antidote. He should be looking for a genetic disease. Finally, Ning Jiumo raised his head. Wei Wei Bai felt that this was a cliché TV series. She could guess the ending with one look. But for her, who was bored, it was good to pass the time. Now it was the climax. When Ning Jiumo raised his head, he became smarter and better looking. The system had already said that the scars on Ning Jiumo's face were not that scary. Therefore, Ning Jiumo would definitely make his skin better so that the Emperor would believe that the Celestial Master Swindler was the real deal. Wei Wei Bai sighed. The Emperor feels like a pitiful old man with dementia. He is being hypnotized by a high-quality liar. I feel like the Emperor will be cheated until he goes bankrupt in the end. Although the Emperor was not a good person. But the liar Ning Jiumo was even worse. He even lied to his own family. It was said that the pills that the Heavenly Master gave the Emperor were all poisonous. If he ate too much, the Emperor would not be far from death. Ning Jiumo was halfway through raising his head when the live broadcast was suddenly cut off. Wei Wei Bai was confused. What's wrong? After watching half of the series, even if he knew what was going to happen next, he would still feel uncomfortable. How could he have climaxed? The guy who climaxed didn't have a hook. The system immediately checked and fixed it. The live broadcast malfunctioned. The signal isn't very good. Let me fix it. Was it easy to unify? All she did every day was sewing and mending. Moreover, it couldn't say that it had short-circuited the live stream when it was burning the red line. As for that red thread, it had been burning for so long, yet it had only melted by half. There was also a portion that wasn't afraid of fire or knives at all. It was almost at its wit's end with this red thread. Once it was fixed, Wei Wei Bai couldn't see the scene in the imperial court. But soon, there was an uproar from the officials in the imperial court. Then, there were congratulatory voices. It seemed that the emperor had found his benefactor. Wei Wei Bai was bored and squatted at the side with the eunuch. She couldn't see the ending and felt uncomfortable. Chapter 1600. After squatting until her legs were numb, the door of the court opened. All sorts of celebratory sounds could be heard. Wei Wei Bai looked carefully and realized that the person in the crowd was actually Ning Jiumo. The weather had just cleared up and the dark clouds had dispersed. The sunlight was like gold, shining on the stone-green robe. The silk fabric shone with a glossy light. His features were picturesque. His cold and noble eyes were full of elegance. His thin lips were cold and red. His hair was tied up with a jade crown, revealing his well-defined face. There was no hideous wound on the disfigured half of his face. It was just a light red mark that fell on the corner of his eye on one side of his face. It was like a flower in spring, extremely beautiful but also extremely faint. The naive look in Ning Jiomo's eyes disappeared and was replaced by calmness with restrained ambition. Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt that fool Ning had changed. He had become more good-looking. He had also become smarter. It seemed that it was difficult to cheat him of his favorability. Ning Jiomo missed fool Ning when he disappeared. Ning Jiomo calmly bade farewell to the officials one by one. His every move was noble and elegant, low-key and calm. He left a good impression on the officials. More importantly, everyone knew about it. Fool Ning Jiomo had been reborn. He was a noble person appointed by Heavenly Master Lin and the Emperor. His future was bound to be limitless. Ning Jiomo was followed by a few attentive eunuchs. He looked straight ahead as he walked. When he brushed past the pillar where Wei Wei Bai was hiding, Ning Jiomo raised his eyes slightly, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a casual smile. His indifferent and noble smile was now indescribably complacent. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly. He straightened his back and walked over as if he was showing off. It was as if he wanted Wei Wei Bai to regret that she had despised him. Xing Yao immediately tugged at Wei Wei Bai. "Quick, follow him. You are now Prince Ning's little palace maid." Ning Jiomo pretended to forget everything. So Wei Wei Bai, the palace maid who had been following him. Ning Jiomo would definitely pretend not to know him. Xing Yao's role was to transfer Wei Wei Bai to Ning Jiomo's side again. She was once again his palace maid. Wei Wei Bai was not eye-catching, and the emperor was too lazy to care about Ning Jiomo's life. As long as Ning Jiomo attended every time the emperor performed the ritual, it would be fine. Therefore, it didn't matter whether Ning Jiomo had more or less palace maids by his side. Hence, after Ning Jiomo lost his memory, Wei Wei Bai had become like this. While a bunch of palace maids were fighting to go to King Ning Palace to be servants, she returned to Ning Jiomo's side so easily. She realized that Ning Jiomo's palace had changed from that dilapidated cold palace. They moved to the busiest central hall. This was the closest place to the emperor's palace. It seemed that the old emperor also knew that cultivating immortality was a crime against the heavens. Therefore, once it was confirmed that Ning Jiomo was the scapegoat to block the disaster, he immediately moved him to the spot closest to him. This place was completely different from the dilapidated cold palace. There were people everywhere, and they were all well-behaved. There was a garden full of peach blossoms. When Wei Wei Bai entered the inner hall, she saw Ning Jiomo sitting casually on the bed. He was wearing a stone-green robe. He had already taken off his jade crown, and his black hair was draped over his shoulders. His facial features were exquisite, and his face was naturally cold. His every move seemed to have been practiced, and it looked better than a fox's dance. Wei Wei Bai entered the hall, but the door was closed by Zhang Yi. In the gorgeous hall, the fragrance of sandalwood rose in spirals from the expensive incense burner. Chapter 1601. Bai Weiwei looked him up and down, then obediently crouched down and saluted, "Your Highness." Ning Jiomo snorted. "Why? You're pretending now. Weren't you bold before?" Sure enough, once he gained power, the little palace maid had to lower her head and bow to him. Ning Jiomo casually picked up the wine pot beside him and his eyes fell on her neck. It was white and more fragrant than the glutinous rice bowl. He drank and said with a smile, "Look, as long as I gain power, we don't have to go back to the cold palace." Wei Wei Bai suddenly looked up and frowned. She got up and rushed in front of him. Then she took the wine pot away from him. She slammed the wine pot on the table with so much force that a crack appeared on the table. Ning Jiomo looked at the crack and his mouth twitched. Wei Wei Bai said coldly, "Your Highness, who allowed you to drink? You're not in good health, how can you drink?" "Ah." Her cute and adorable appearance immediately turned into a murderous aura as soon as her mother got close to her. Ning Joma felt guilty for a moment and then remembered that his identity was different. He immediately slammed the table. How dare you! You even want to control me when I drink. Who do you think you are? Wei Wei Bai's eyes hardened and she slammed the table. I'm doing this for your own good. My husband is still in your body. If you drink too much, what will happen to him? She slammed the table too hard and it suddenly cracked. Ning Joma wanted to shout back, but when he saw the table, he bent his fingers and retracted them. Was she still a woman? She was so strong. He still said stubbornly, the body is mine. He's just a lonely soul and he wants to take over the magpie's nest. Bai Weiwei snorted coldly, then obediently crouched down and lowered her head. Ning Joma looked at her and felt that he had punched cotton. He was so aggrieved. He had been posing for a long time, but she didn't even look at his face when she came in. She didn't look at the gorgeous decorations around him. There was also his elegant and graceful appearance. She just stared at him to drink. Could it be that his current appearance was not worthy of admiration? Why wasn't she surprised at all that he had regained his looks? Ning Joma sulked for a long time before suddenly saying, "Hey." Wei Wei Bai's legs were numb from squatting. She didn't look at him in a good mood. What are you doing? Ning Joma deliberately turned his face, which was almost healed and only had a small red mark on it, towards her. Do you think I'm different today? Wei Wei Bai sized him up and guessed, you've become more arrogant. Are you asking for a beating? Ning Joma almost suffocated himself to death. He immediately reached out and patted his recovered face. Here. Wei Wei Bai looked at him as if she was looking at an idiot. So there really was someone who slapped his own face. Ning Joma suddenly felt that his actions were too stupid. He immediately stopped patting and sat back down. His expression turned cold again. In the future, you will be my head palace maid. You will serve me. If that fool appears, tell him to imitate me. Otherwise, we will all die together. Wei Wei Bai said coldly, okay. She didn't say a single word of nonsense. There was no intimacy at all. Then the atmosphere froze. Silence and awkwardness took over the gorgeous palace. Wei Wei Bai had nothing to do and chatted with the system. Ning Joma is so arrogant. When will he go to jail? The system said, you're catching fools to increase your favorability. Wei Wei Bai didn't treat Ning Tsongming well at all. Chapter 1602. Bai Weiwei, I had no choice, aw. In the beginning, I brushed the line with idiot Ning. If he became smart, I would happily please him. With this kind of fickle appearance, the favorability would plummet, do you believe it? People like Ning Joma. He was bullied badly. Although he was full of schemes, there were others who were as scheming as him. He would only be on guard and wouldn't have a favorable impression of her. Moreover, it was best for idiot Ning to gain favorable impression of her. She could gain idiot Ning's favor and complete the mission in the end. She couldn't be bothered to gain idiot Ning's favor anymore. Anyway, the mission didn't say that she had to gain 2 favorability points. Bite salted fish Wei gave Ning Joma a cold face very calmly. She really missed idiot Ning when he wasn't around. Ning Joma felt that the atmosphere was too cold. When he was stupid, she was willing to give him anything. The atmosphere was joyous and harmonious. But once he became smart, she seemed to want him to die. Ning Joma thought that she would look at him differently after he gained power. In the end, she was blind and couldn't see any changes in him. Ning Joma also felt a little smug. After all, he had only succeeded once. There was still a long way to go. Thinking of this, Ning Jioma couldn't be smug anymore. He pointed at the plate beside him. There was a pink and blue palace dress on it. This is your dress. You can change. The pink palace dress was worn by the lowest-ranked palace maids. His identity was different now, so she would also be promoted. She would become a personal palace maid. With the pink and blue palace dress, she would have no problem walking sideways among the palace maids. Ning Jioma said casually, "Change behind the screen." With that said, as if to avoid suspicion, he lay on the mat and turned his back to Wei Wei Bai. She was silent for a long time before she finally picked up the dress and walked behind the screen. Ning Jioma rolled his eyes and turned to face the screen. He saw her changing behind the screen. The graceful and petite figure behind the screen had a natural seductive feeling. As Ning Jioma watched, his heart heated up. He couldn't help but pick up the wine again and drink a few mouthfuls. Then he put it back and pretended he hadn't drunk it. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai was about to come out, he turned around and went back. He didn't feel guilty at all for peeping. She was his woman anyway. He could look at it however he liked. There was a golden bell tied to the belt of the palace dress, which he had specially made. That way, when she walked, he would be able to find her. When he heard the sound of the bell, he immediately turned around and saw Wei Wei Bai with her head lowered. She was holding her pink-blue dress in her hands as she walked over carefully. The dress was much longer than the pink one. The pink palace maid uniform was short because she had to do heavy work. On the other hand, the pink-blue color didn't require much work, so the hemline of the dress was much longer and bigger. It was like a blooming blue lotus, and every step it took made it seem like it was floating on clouds. Wei Wei Bai's hair was simply tied up without too many decorations. Her skin was crystal clear, her beautiful lips were delicate like cherry blossoms, and her eyes were clear and bright. She was wearing a more ladylike pink-blue palace dress. She was even more peaceful and sweet. Ning Jioma's eyes darkened. He realized that his palace maid was too attractive. In that broken palace, she had never dressed up properly. When she smiled, many of the palace servants at the bottom would let her go. But now, she was dressed better and dressed more exquisitely. Not many people in the harem could compare to her. / Fast. Chapter 1603. Ning Jioma had the urge to take off her clothes, mess up her hair, and make her ugly. Wei Wei Bai put on her clothes and bowed respectfully to Ning Jioma. "Your Highness, if there's nothing else, I'll take my leave first." She wasn't even willing to stay with him for a while now. Ning Jioma couldn't be bothered to beg her. He snorted. "If you want to scram, then scram." With that said, he turned to face her. Wei Wei Bai turned to leave without hesitation. But just as she opened the door, a weak voice sounded behind her. "Ah, Wei, where are you going?" Wei Wei Bai's fingers froze. She immediately turned around and revealed a bright smile. "Your Highness, you're awake." With this smile, the calmness in her eyes became lively and pleasant. Ning Jioma looked at her in a daze and said clumsily, "Here, where is this?" She immediately rushed over, her dress fluttering and the bells ringing. Like a butterfly, she threw herself into his arms and hugged him tightly. "Your Highness, it's okay. I'm here. It's the same everywhere." This sentence made Ning Jioma relax. He was silent for a while before saying, "With Ah Wei here, I'm not afraid anymore." Wei Wei Bai looked up and smiled sweetly. "Your Highness, you have to be obedient and listen to me in the future. Only then can we leave the palace." She was still thinking about leaving the palace. Ning Jioma's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. He acted like a fool. He was that fool. So it was very easy for him to lie to her. Ning Jioma carefully grabbed her hand. Why can't we leave the palace now? Wei Wei Bai was stunned and forced a smile. Because the weather is bad. Ning Jioma's eyes darkened. Rain? Wei Wei Bai quickly said, yes, it's raining. Ning Jioma reached out and gently placed his hand beside her cheek, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. He revealed a silly smile. Aw Wei, you're so pretty. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment, then a sweet smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She held his face with both hands and gently kissed the red mark on his cheek. Your Highness is also good-looking. Ning Jioma paused for a moment before touching his face helplessly. Just now, all the civil and military officials in the imperial court were praising him as if he was a divine being, but he didn't feel anything. Her simple words made him feel as if he had really regained his original appearance. Ning Jioma said slowly, Ah Wei, isn't this place good? Wei Wei Bai shook her head. No, this is not a good place for us to stay. Ning Jioma asked in a daze, why? Wei Wei Bai said, because we are too stupid and the people here are too smart. We will be bullied to death here. When the weather is better, I will take you out of the palace. She spoke earnestly and tenderly. She then turned around and said, Your Highness, it's time for dinner. I'll go and see if the food is ready. Don't go out and wait for me to come back. Ning Jioma nodded obediently. Okay, I'll wait for you. Bai Weiwei walked out with a peace of mind. The bell rang, jingling. When the sound of the bell was far away, the foolishness in Ning Jioma's eyes disappeared. He looked in the direction she left for a long time. He suddenly said softly, You're stupid. Don't you still have me? With him here, who could bully her? Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 65. A respectful voice came from outside the door. Your Highness. It was Xing Qiao. The gentleness in Ning Jioma's eyes disappeared. Come in. Xing Qiao came in and knelt down to kowtow. She then softly talked about what happened in the imperial court and the crown prince's situation. He won't make it for more than a few days. The drug is too strong. If there is no antidote, the crown prince will die. Chapter 1604. Ning Jioma was indifferent. How's the Empress? Shen Kuang said, after smashing everything in the palace, the Empress was so angry that she vomited blood. She rushed to find the Emperor before the imperial doctor even called. Ning Jioma smiled coldly. She went to find father. When he called father, his tone was so heavy that it could kill. Shen Kuang said, the Emperor's palace is more secure. Our people can't infiltrate, so we don't know what the Empress is doing now. Ning Jioma reached out and held his forehead, his eyes cold. I'll go greet her. I haven't greeted the Empress since I regained my mind. After he finished, he immediately got up. Shen Kuang followed him. Ning Jioma said, let someone drag Wei, don't let her know where I'm going. She thought that he was in a fool state now. If she knew that he wasn't a fool, but he kept lying to her, she would definitely be very angry. Shen Kuang frowned. His Highness cared about the little palace maid. Too much. Shen Kuang didn't dare to say anything more and just agreed. Ning Jioma left in a hurry. Shen Kuang immediately ordered, wash the girl and tie her to His Highness' bed. His Highness really cared about the little palace maid. The little palace maid was also loyal. If she could become His Highness's concubine, it would be a great honor. Shen Kuang felt that she had tied the red string well. Wei Wei Bai was looking at whether the meal was ready. She was hungry. Ning Jioma wouldn't starve to death, but she couldn't. She could only work after she was full. The system said, the male lead is fighting with the old emperor. The empress is also there. It's like a battlefield. Wei Wei Bai looked at the others serving the dishes. Can't they let people eat? Fighting during mealtime, do they want to starve people to death? The system said, they're almost done. A shocking secret has been exposed. The old emperor was the one who drugged concubine Ro and the male lead. The poison that made Ning Jumo stupid. It was the emperor. The emperor, who dealt with alchemy all year round, had a few strange poisons by his side. The one that made Ning Jumo stupid was one of them. Wei Wei Bai looked at the dishes and couldn't move. She was so hungry that her stomach was sticking to her back. She wasn't interested and said, why would that dog emperor poison his own son? The system said, concubine Ro was the emperor suspected that the emperor suspected emperor was not his son, so he poisoned them. They were supposed to be poisoned to death. But the poison that didn't work. Coincidentally, the empress. Concubine Ro died. It was only because of Ning Jumo's amazing luck that he could hold on until now. Later on, when the dog emperor found out that he had wronged consort Ro, he pretended that he had not poisoned her. From Konamo. By Wei Wei, such a big melon. Hurry up and finish your melon and come back, Ning Jumo. She didn't have any feud with the target in this world. But the target had a feud with her family. The target in every world was a scam. She had to take revenge every time. After Bai Weiwei finished speaking, a small eunuch serving the dishes next to her handed over a cup of tonic. This is what His Highness ordered. It's for you. Weiwei Bai asked the poison testing system, is it poisonous? System, no, but... Transmigration system, my Prince Charming, come here, /crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the full article at https://www.sashu.com//crossover system, Prince Charming, come here. Download address, https://www.sashu.com crossover system, Prince Charming, come here. Mobile reading address, https://m/sashu.com// button. The next time you open the bookshelf, you will be able to see it. If you like crossover system, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 1605. Weiwei Bai didn't argue when she heard that it wasn't poisoned. After all, Ning Jumo definitely wouldn't be back anytime soon. She couldn't go back and expose him for acting dumb. She would definitely starve to death if she waited. So she picked up the tonic and saw that it was soup. How stingy, there wasn't even any soup residue. Weiwei Bai felt disgusted and swallowed it. System, after drinking Weiwei Bai, she asked, but what? System, it's not poisonous, but it's drugged. An aphrodisiac that makes your limbs weak. Weiwei Bai, system, everyone in the palace knows that you have an affair with the male lead. So when the male lead hinted, the people below prepared something for him. Weiwei Bai was a gift prepared. Selling myself again. Bai salted fish sighed helplessly. System, how about buying a substitute sticker? Weiwei Bai, is there a discount? The system replied, there's no way I'll give you a discount, not for the rest of my life. This thing was a hot seller, and once it was a hot seller, there was no discount. Weiwei Bai, get lost. A few maids came over and hugged Weiwei Bai, who was starting to feel weak and warm. Miss, take a bath and change your clothes. Weiwei Bai's limbs were weak as she was dragged away and bathed in petals. Then she was dragged onto a large bed by the maids, with silver curtains hanging around her. She tried to shout, Tongzi. The system didn't respond. Weiwei Bai curled up into a bowl. While she was bathing, the system was probably blocked. For Wei Wei Bai, this medicine wasn't heavy, so she could bear it. It wasn't the kind of miraculous medicine that would kill her if she didn't do it. If Ning Jiumo didn't come back, she estimated that after 2 or 3 hours, the medicine would be gone. So Wei Wei Bai's face was red as she leaned against the pillow, hugging the blanket and enduring silently. Suddenly, there was a rumble outside. It was thunder. Wei Wei Bai was still counting sheep, so she didn't care. The sound of heavy rain could be heard, and the gloomy weather made the room even more dark. Suddenly she heard the door open. Wei Wei Bai struggled to open her eyes. She couldn't see who it was through the bed curtain. It should be Ning Jiumo. After all, in the Royal Azura Arena, as long as no one was killed, it was fine. It was time for Ning Jiumo to come back for dinner. Not only was she hot, but she was also hungry. He had only eaten medicinal soup for one night, which was equivalent to eating nothing at all. A hand gently lifted the curtain of the bed. His fingers were stained with rainwater and were incomparably pale. Then Ning Jiumo appeared. He was soaked in the rain and sat by the bed in a daze. His face was so pale that it was drained of blood. There was a sickly sense of fragility. He did not seem to notice that there was someone behind him. "Why?" Ning Jiumo said softly. He trembled. "Why were you the one who poisoned him?" It was only today that he found out that the one who had poisoned him and his mother was actually his father. Ning Jiumo's voice trembled. "You have the antidote, but you'd rather give it to the crown prince than me. Are you really my father?" Wei Wei Bai rolled her eyes behind him. "Big brother, stop acting." He clearly saw her when he came in just now. His gaze was so obvious when he looked away. And it was not the first time that dog of an emperor was so ruthless. Ning Jiumo's sudden betrayal of a father and son was simply too abrupt. Of course, Wei Wei Bai could not act as if she understood. After all, her information came from the system. Ning Jiumo's attitude was definitely because he was certain that she did not know about these things. That was why he came to act in front of her, pretending to be pitiful to gain sympathy. Ning Jiumo was so into his act that a few drops of fake tears fell. Chapter 1606. He heard her heavy breathing behind him. Ning Jiumo's lips curled into a smug smile. When he was stupid, he would gain sympathy. When he was smart, wouldn't he gain sympathy? Leave the palace. It was impossible for him to leave the palace in this lifetime. He was more of a way to let her accept him when he was sober. Today was a good day. He knew the truth of what happened back then. He also had a blood debt of revenge on the old emperor. When he ascended the throne step by step, that so-called father of his. He had even more reason to cut him into pieces. He knew the location of the antidote. Even if the old emperor gave him an antidote because of the empress's fuss. Ning Jiumo knew that he wouldn't be able to get the antidote. Because the empress would definitely be eager to give it to the crown prince. But the crown prince was impotent. The poison he gave him was much more poisonous than the one that made him stupid back then. A crown prince without descendants was nothing to be afraid of. He had to find an opportunity to get the rest of the antidote from the old emperor. He was poisoned too deeply. One antidote wasn't enough. He had to remove the poison in his bones. He definitely needed a lot of antidotes. He had to get all of them from the old emperor. He didn't even want to call that man father anymore. Every time he saw the emperor, he would smile. In fact, he didn't know how many times he cursed the old dog in his heart. Why wasn't he dead yet? He felt that he was an eyesore. Wei Wei Bai's breathing became heavier. It was even a little messy. Ning Jiumo still pretended to be hurt and pitiful. He was so pitiful. His mother was killed by his father. And he was poisoned. What a miserable life. He was about to cry. Ning Jumo's eyes were dark and sober. There was no sadness in them. His sadness had been worn down during those torturous years. So now that he was making use of his misery, he didn't hold back. Suddenly, his sleeve was grabbed by the person behind him. Her fingers pinched his sleeve so tightly that her nails turned white. Ning Jumo understood. Her heart softened and she wanted to comfort him. But in the next moment, a hot body hugged him from behind. "Your Highness," she murmured softly, her breath caressing his neck. It was so hot that the skin on his neck turned red. Wei Wei Bai's voice trembled. "Your Highness, I feel terrible." He babbled on, but she didn't listen at all. He felt that this pig trotter looked especially delicious. This medicine was simply poisonous. No man could endure it. Seeing a man simply made her hungry and thirsty. Only then did Ning Jumo realize that something was wrong. He thought that Wei Wei Bai was just sleeping on the bed. After all, they had been sleeping together. Except for special occasions, he didn't dare to force himself on her. She was strong. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to hold on and would end up with a broken bone. Ning Jumo didn't know that his men had drugged Wei Wei Bai. But when Wei Wei Bai's kiss landed softly on his hair and by his ear, he couldn't help it. His ears immediately turned red, and he immediately understood what was going on. There was something wrong with Wei Wei Bai. He turned around and held her waist, pressing her into the soft bedding. He held her weak hands very easily. In the dark room, only the sound of the rain could be heard. And Ning Jumo couldn't even hear the sound of the rain. He stared at Wei Wei Bai in a daze. Her eyes were half closed, and her face was abnormally red. The redness spread to her neck and into her scattered clothes. She seemed a little helpless, her eyes blurred and burning. Ning Jumo held his breath. He felt that he had been acting pitiful for a long time, but in the end, he couldn't beat her simple sigh. Chapter 1607. Someday, he might be murdered by her. Ning Jumo hugged her helplessly and urgently. Suddenly, he had a splitting headache and his vision turned black. He gritted his teeth and held it in. He wouldn't become stupid, right? Ning Jumo trembled and reached for the bottle of suppressive antidote that was similar to poison. If he became stupid at this time, wouldn't that fool take advantage of him? Everything was his own fault. No, he felt that he had become stupid now. After thinking about it, it was like wearing a green hat for himself. But just as he reached out, his vision turned black and he became confused. Ning Jumo looked at everything in front of him in a daze and saw a person in his arms. It was Ah Wei. Fool Ning smiled. Ah Wei. Wei Wei Bai hugged him softly and said softly, "Your Highness, I'm hot." Ning Jumo immediately took off her clothes. "I'll fan you, it won't be hot soon." He took off his clothes and fanned her with his sleeves. Ah Wei was really hot, her face was as red as a monkey's butt. Wei Wei Bai nodded and looked up at him helplessly. She was sure that he was fool Ning and not pretending. Her hand gently caressed his arm. "Your Highness, give me a hug." Her voice was low and soft. It was like a sweet cake, it sounded sweet on the tip of his tongue. Ning Jumo hugged her obediently. As he hugged her, he also became hot. Then he lowered his head softly and hugged her gently. The sound of the rain outside the window and the candlelight inside the door swayed. Ning Jumo only felt that his Ah Wei was really beautiful. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 85. The sound of the rain gradually faded away and the morning birds chirped. Wei Wei Bai had a splitting headache. Tongzi, next time someone tries to drug me, can you say it faster? This drug was to squeeze her dry. System, next time someone gives you food, can you not swallow it in one gulp? Even pigs couldn't eat as fast as the host. After the system finished speaking, it lowered its head and continued to bite the red thread. It had given up on burning it and was now biting the red thread with its teeth. Its teeth were very strong, let's see if it could break it. The host still didn't know how hard it had been working, and she was still going to hook up with those young hunks. It was about to develop a revolutionary friendship with the bullet screen. If one day the two of them were killed by this red string, it would be too late. Wei Wei Bai felt that Tongzi had been very cold recently. Did it secretly hook up with another host? Was she planning to have one foot in both boats? Wei Wei Bai suddenly noticed that Ning Zhumo's breathing had become heavy. He was about to wake up. His favorability had also changed. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 65. She felt that she was getting used to the dozens of bungee jumps. She pretended not to know and softly said, "Your Highness, are you poisoned?" Ning Zhumo had a splitting headache as he regained his senses. Last night, he was a fool and didn't know anything, even though the result was good. But he was even more dissatisfied. Then, he heard Wei Wei Bai whisper in doubt. He was poisoned. Last night, he had said so much just to make her suspicious. He couldn't always pretend to be a lonely ghost. So he had to make her suspicious and let her know in the end. The fool she liked was him when he was poisoned. After all, he was the same person. Even if he was cured in the end, she couldn't deny that he was still her husband. Wei Wei Bai sighed softly. What kind of poison is it? Ning Zhumo's body moved and he was about to open his eyes, but she immediately crawled out of his arms and rolled into the quilt, pretending to be asleep. His mouth stiffened. She hid so quickly. Forward slash forward slash. Forward slash forward slash. Chapter 1608. Could it be that she really liked a fool like him, so she refused to tell the truth? Ning Zhumo got up and glared at the person curled up in the blanket. Pretending. What was there to pretend about with such lousy acting skills? He reached out and wanted to pull her out, but when he thought about how she wasn't wearing anything under the blanket, he didn't dare to reach out. Then he silently got out of bed and put on his clothes. He still had to go to the morning court and accompany that dog emperor to refine pills. He would think of a way to let her know the truth in the future. Ning Zhumo put on his clothes and lifted the bed curtain. He saw that she was curled up in a ball with her eyes tightly shut. Her face was still red, almost as red as the peach blossoms outside the window. His fingertips slid across her lips, and she shivered. Ning Zhumo smiled and didn't tease her anymore. Then he pretended not to know that she was awake and left again. When he walked out of the door, Jing Qiao came over. Ning Zhumo said, "I plan to have a secondary consort. You go and arrange it." In the end, the little palace maid was still promoted. Her status as the main wife was definitely not enough. So Ning Zhumo could only settle for the second best and let her be the concubine. Actually, it was also a kind of protection because the concubine didn't have to care too much and just had to take care of him. Jing Qiao nodded. Ning Zhumo added, "Oh right, send a few people to serve her. Don't let her run around." He felt that the little palace maid was cute. He felt that everyone wanted to take a fancy to his little palace maid. Jing Qiao held back her laughter and nodded respectfully. Ning Zhumo thought about it and nagged that the room was too unfeminine. There were a few more peach blossoms outside the window, and all the grass was pulled out. In the end, he suddenly stopped and frowned. "Okay, that's all. We'll talk about it later." He was the prince, so she should be the one serving him. Why did he feel like he was her servant, thinking about her every day? It was too degrading. Ning Jioma snorted and strode away. Wei Wei Bai sensed that Ning Jioma had left. She spread out her limbs and fell asleep. The little fool's favorability towards her was 85. She also had to start thinking about how to complete the side mission. Wei Wei Bai said, I really don't want to hook up with the old emperor. Why don't we go and seduce him? The system had just taken a sip of juice and was about to swallow it when it almost choked itself to death. Host, where's your drive? What's the efficiency of your perfect side mission? You have to work hard. He didn't want to increase his favorability just because it was easy. He had directly given up on himself and was too lazy to do anything. Wei Wei Bai turned over. What's with the efficiency? I can't eat or drink. I'm going to sleep. The system's voice suddenly became soft. Empress, this servant greets you. Wei Wei Bai had goosebumps all over. The system was poisoned. The system continued in its eunuch voice, I see the peach blossoms blooming outside the window. Do you want to go and enjoy the flowers? Wei Wei Bai, fuck, don't use that voice. Have you watched too many palace dramas? The system roared. If you don't complete the side quest and cause me to become a eunuch, I will always use this voice to talk to you. It used this voice to talk to her all day long. Wei Wei Bai felt that her ears were going to rot sooner or later. Even the words of real eunuchs were not as pretentious and unpleasant as the system's. Wei Wei Bai could only get up and hold her forehead. Okay, I'll complete it. It's just an old man. I just have to smile at him and tell him not to see me if he doesn't want to be my empress. That's all. After all, there was the reward of the emperor's love. Chapter 1609. In addition, the old emperor was useless and incompetent. She didn't need to get close to the old man. She just needed to be the empress for a day. She immediately kicked the old man away. For someone who was obsessed with looks, who would come to the old man? Just thinking about it made her wish she was dead. Why don't we? Wei Wei Bai said hesitantly. System, if we don't complete the mission, I will commit suicide and hang myself with a red string. Wei Wei Bai, hang yourself with a red string. The system is getting more and more sissy. Ning Jioma knelt on the cushion. The old emperor was meditating. So he had to accompany him in his meditation. Not far from him was the empress. This woman was wearing a Taoist robe. She was trying to please the old emperor. This woman was also very scheming. She said that she wanted to cultivate the path of immortality with the old emperor. The old emperor was naturally happy. The crown prince also started to regain his consciousness, but because the poison was too deep, his brain was sometimes good and sometimes not. And his memory loss was so serious that he couldn't remember who was who. More importantly, he had completely withered. Ning Jioma's eyes were dark. He glanced at the empress, then looked away and continued to kneel and meditate. When the meditation was complete, the old emperor was served by someone to wash his face. Ning Jioma was also thinking about how to talk about the concubine. He pretended to forget the past. Of course, he couldn't say that the little palace maid used to serve him. He could only say that he occasionally saw a woman and wanted to bring her into the palace because he liked her. The old emperor was in good health recently. Coupled with the medicine given by Heavenly Master Lin, he was also very excited. So he was in a good mood. Now that he asked to bring Wei Wei Bai into his palace, there shouldn't be a big problem. Ning Jioma even put aside the conspiracy and thought seriously about how to get a good reward for the little palace maid. Otherwise, with her low status, what if she was bullied in the future? Ning Jioma's eyes softened. He was about to look up and speak to the old emperor. The Empress said gently, "Your Majesty, the Crown Prince took the medicine you gave and his health is much better. It's not surprising that you gave the medicine. It's really something from the gods." When the old emperor heard this, he was indeed happy. Now that he heard about gods and immortals, he was very easy to talk to. Ning Jioma also revealed a gentle smile. The family of 3 was happy and harmonious. The Empress suddenly looked at Ning Jioma. Your father has always been good to you. He used to carry you to see the lanterns often." Ning Jioma almost broke his cultivation. This old woman was probably here to test him. "What are you looking at? This dog of an emperor did hug me before. But that was just for show. Later on, when his mother got into trouble, he didn't even have the time to kill him, let alone hug him." Of course, Ning Jioma couldn't say that. There was a moment of confusion on his face as if he was trying to recall something. Then, he frowned in distress. His young and tender face had a kind of endearing innocence. "Really? But I forgot. But I know that Imperial Father is such a benevolent person. He must be very good to me." The Empress calmly sized him up. "Of course, Your Majesty. Recently, the Prime Minister came to beg me. He said that his only daughter is almost 20 years old, but she is still bitterly waiting for Mo. This concubine remembers that Mo had a childhood relationship with her." The Emperor's cloudy eyes moved. "That's true. Mo has grown up, so I'll give you a princess consort." Ning Jioma's eyes narrowed and his fingers clenched into fists in his sleeves. But he smiled gently. "How can I not listen to Imperial Father's words? But I'm not in good health and I'm afraid of delaying people." At https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 1610. The Emperor waved his hand indifferently. "You're already so old. How can you not have a consort? I'll set a date for you to get married." Ning Jioma knew that the Empress was eyeing him from behind. He couldn't reveal any flaws, so he could only hold on. "But I forgot. I don't remember if there was a marriage in the past." The old emperor looked up at Ning Jioma. He saw the sincerity and purity in his eyes. He saw a disfigured fool in the imperial court with his own eyes. In the white light, he regained his consciousness. The scars on his face gradually fell off, revealing white and tender skin. He had turned into this pleasing appearance. The Taoist master said that the reborn Ning Jioma would treat his father as the most important person and help him block the disaster. Looking at Ning Jioma's current appearance, he was no different from his pleasing appearance in the past. After all, he was still his own child. He had already forgotten the past. The emperor felt a little more kinship in his heart. He said, "Marriage is still necessary. If you have a girl you like, you can also take her as your consort." Ning Jioma's eyes lit up. I met a palace maid recently. I admire her very much. Please help me." The emperor frowned. "Palace maid? Her status is too low. Give her the position of concubine." Ning Jioma's face showed a trace of annoyance. "But I said I would give her the position of secondary consort. Now it's just a concubine. When I go back, I will be seen as a person who doesn't keep his word. I will lose face." The emperor looked at his relaxed appearance and actually found it pleasing to the eye. He was tired and waved his hand. Bring her here for me to take a look. Then I will personally give her the position of secondary consort. I will save your face. Ning Jioma immediately revealed a happy smile. Father, you are indeed the best father. The Empress's face turned cold. She didn't expect Ning Jioma to win the Emperor's favor so quickly. She was about to say something. The Emperor waved his hand. Okay, call that girl over first and make her the secondary consort. As for the consort, we will talk about it later. After taking in a secondary consort, the consort's matter could only be put aside first. Otherwise, if concubines Su and Wang Fei entered at the same time, it would be too troublesome. Ning Jioma immediately nodded and got up to instruct the eunuch outside to bring someone in. The Empress could no longer maintain her smile. The old Emperor trusted Ning Jioma so much. Thinking about how the Crown Prince's condition was still not stable, the Empress was so worried that her hair turned white. The antidote from before was obtained by sacrificing a lot of benefits. After all, the Crown Prince had done such a disgraceful thing. He was lucky that the Emperor didn't beat him to death. The Empress could only continue to wait and see if she could get the second antidote. This kind of poison was slow-acting and required a lot of antidotes. She didn't know who had poisoned her, but the Empress was so angry that she dug her nails into her palms. If she found out, she would make that person die a horrible death and destroy his family. Therefore, compared to overthrowing Ning Jioma, the Crown Prince's illness was more important. After waiting for a while, the Emperor could not hold it in any longer. Although his spirit would be stimulated after taking the pill, he would not be able to hold on any longer. But they would also feel sleepy. The Emperor said, Jin will rest first. When Jin wakes up, I will send someone to your hall to announce the decree. Ning Jioma was not very happy that Wei Wei Bai had caught the Empress' attention. So he immediately nodded respectfully and said with a smile, This son obeys the decree. The Emperor got up and the head eunuch beside him immediately helped him out. Wei Wei Bai was led through the door by Zhang Yi. There was still one more door to see Ning Jioma. Chapter 1611. The system said, that old emperor has already left. Wait until your favorability reaches 90 before you attempt the side mission. Wei Wei Bai said, let's not attempt it. I can't bring myself to do it to the old emperor. The system said, I'll hang myself. Wei Wei Bai said, go ahead. The system was speechless. Suddenly, pink petals appeared in front of her, dancing in the air. Bai Wei Wei. What the hell? What are these illusory petals? Ever since I saw you in the crowd, you are like the faint mark of cherry blossoms, left in my heart. From now on, the world is yours, the mountains and rivers are yours, and time is yours. I am also yours. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. What the hell is with all these pretentious, sick, and repetitive sentences? The system said, that emperor is like this when he starts everything. Wei Wei Bai said, why does he start everything for no reason? The system said, it's like this. The old emperor is not far from you, looking at you. Wei Wei Bai instinctively turned to look. She saw the emperor standing at the door, as if he was about to leave. However, after taking half a step, his body froze. The system said, don't look at him. The more you look at him, the stronger your love for the emperor will be. Wei Wei Bai saw the wrinkles on the emperor's face and quietly withdrew her gaze. Then, she followed the little eunuch through the door expressionlessly. She pretended not to see the emperor's gaze. Don't look at me with a face full of wrinkles. She refused. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly followed the eunuch. The emperor, who was standing at the door, froze for a long time. The head eunuch beside him asked carefully, Your Majesty, what's wrong? Why did he suddenly stop moving? Is he about to become a deity? The emperor said with a trembling voice, "Who was that just now?" The head eunuch looked back. "It should be the concubine that His Highness King Ning is about to take in." The emperor reached out and clutched his chest, his face trembling. His eyes were terrifyingly bright. "I suddenly feel like I found the meaning of life. What longevity! What immortal cultivation! How can they compare to her? We definitely knew each other in our previous lives." No, tears flowed from the emperor's eyes. "We will definitely be a pair for all eternity. But now, I was born but you were not. When you were born, I was already old. No wonder I was so obsessed with longevity. It was all because I wanted to meet her." The eunuch was speechless. Oh no, the emperor's brain is damaged from the medicine he took. The system nagged at Wei Wei Bai. That love of the emperor will automatically create a romantic atmosphere, such as life after life and so on. As soon as Wei Wei Bai thinks of this, a pile of pink petals flutters in the air. He saw the lover of his life. The old emperor with a wrinkled face. Wei Wei Bai expressed that she would be with him forever if he was good-looking. "If you're ugly and have wrinkles, I'll beat you to death. Wei Wei Bai, I'll endure 100 times. Who asked me to go after an old man? I'll cut him off first." The system fell to the ground with a thud. "In the future, I'll become a eunuch and sing 'Little Apple' in your ears forever." Wei Wei Bai, Ning Jiumo's eyes were almost bursting with joy. When he saw Wei Wei Bai walk in, he immediately rushed over. If it wasn't for the Empress, he would have hugged her. When he saw the Empress's cold face, he immediately held Wei Wei Bai's hand and bowed to her. "Mother, I'll take my leave." The Empress snorted coldly and didn't say anything. Ning Jiumo respectfully turned around and pulled Wei Wei Bai's arm as he walked out. The warm sun shone on his face. His respectful expression gradually turned sinister. The save button below to record this reading record. Chapter 1612. These old bastards, I'll kill them sooner or later. Ning Jiumo cursed in his heart. After walking out of the door, he lowered his head and saw a confused Wei Wei Bai. The darkness on his face disappeared and was replaced by joy. "I told you that you'll have meat to eat if you follow me. Do you believe me?" Wei Wei Bai frowned. "Can you let go of my hand?" Ning Jiumo, why, can't I hold your hand if I'm not a fool? You didn't even think about how you tried to bully me last night. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Then, she straightened her neck. "Who drugged me? In the end, it was my husband who came out. Did you peek again? Can you be more shameless?" Ning Jiumo was so angry that his neck was thick. "You're so heartless. Whoever drugged you is a dog. Look at me now. Which girl wouldn't like me? Why would they use such a despicable trick like drugging me? You're the one who ate the food. Who's to blame? And who's looking at you? With your shriveled body and ugly face." Wei Wei Bai looked at him coldly. "Who knows who's ugly? You look like a toad and you still have the cheek to despise me." System, did these two graduate from kindergarten? Couldn't they scold something more elegant? Suddenly, the system felt gloomy. Then, the system looked up and saw the old emperor standing at the top of the building, looking down bitterly. System, it seemed to see the pink petals flying behind the old emperor. It was so hot that it was blinded. I suddenly understood why the host would rather cut ties with the old emperor than attack him. If I'm handsome, harassing you is a domineering CEO falling in love with me. If I'm ugly, it's sexual harassment. Perverts. I need to see more. In this world, looks were still justice. The system touched its face. Sigh, fortunately, it was handsome. It couldn't see the evil intentions of this world. Wei Wei Bai and Ning Jiumo bickered all the way back to the palace. In the end, Ning Jiumo said angrily, "I went to ask for an imperial edict for you. In the future, you will be conferred by the emperor himself. Anyone who dares to bully you will have to think twice." An imperial edict for a concubine. It was a very heavy weight. Wei Wei Bai frowned. "To be your concubine? Didn't you say that you would release my husband in the future? If he comes back from the dead, how can I be with him?" Ning Jiumo was so angry that he didn't think too much about it. He said directly, "Why do you always remember when I'm stupid? It's always the same person." Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Ning Jiumo was also stunned. Then, the way Ning Jiumo looked at her gradually changed. He immediately felt a little scared and took a few steps back. "This king is hungry, I want to eat." With that, Ning Jiumo immediately turned and left. Wei Wei Bai reacted and immediately reached out to grab his hand, looking anxious. "What do you mean by the same person?" Ning Jiumo immediately started a tug-of-war with her, wanting to snatch her hand back. Wei Wei Bai grabbed him so hard that he grimaced in pain. "You heard me wrong. I mean, we can talk about the future later. Let's settle you down first. In the future, in this palace, who knows how ruthless the fighting will be." She had an additional layer of protection as a concubine, so she wouldn't be killed for no reason. After all, it was common for a palace maid to die just like that. Wei Wei Bai's eyes trembled. Ning Jiumo was afraid that she would take things too hard and immediately said, "I'm joking, let go." Wei Wei Bai's face was cold as she stared at him. She didn't seem to believe him. Ning Jiumo became even more scared. His voice softened a little. "I didn't eat anything so early in the morning to get you a concubine or something. You're not going to starve me to death, right?" Chapter 16:13. Bai Weiwei saw his soft appearance and pretended to be a fool. Unexpectedly, he was similar to that fool. Her expression changed and she suddenly looked away, shaking off his hand. Her voice was a little muffled, as if she was very sad. "Don't make such jokes in the future." With that, Wei Wei Bai turned to leave. Ning Jiumo immediately pounced over and hugged her from behind. "Are you still going to eat? Do you want to starve yourself to death?" With that said, he dragged the dazed Wei Wei Bai away. Ning Jiumo's eyes had a dark smile. She knew that he poisoned her. She also heard what he blurted out. This way, she would suspect and unravel that he was actually the same person as the fool. Ning Jiumo deliberately made this scene. It was to make her doubt him. Only in this way would she be mentally prepared when the truth was revealed. He would slowly wear away her unwillingness, even if he was no longer a fool. She couldn't let go of him anymore. If Ning Jiumo wanted someone, he would do anything to scheme. He couldn't give her what she wanted to leave the palace. But he would share everything else with her. If there was one person in this world, he was willing to share the power toy in his hands with her. That should be Wei Wei Bai. There was no reason, it was just because she was cute. Under the suppression of the medicine, Ning Jiumo's sobriety was so long that no one noticed anything strange. He could guarantee that he wouldn't be a fool for a day if he took a pill. But this was destroying his own body. He knew very well, so he had to get the antidote as soon as possible. After dinner, Ning Jiumo pulled Wei Wei Bai to drink. Wei Wei Bai frowned. "You're a prince, but you don't want to build a country. You only know how to play all day." Ning Jiumo rolled the dice and got the most points. "I win, you drink." Wei Wei Bai's face was cold as she poured a glass of wine into her mouth. The temperature of the wine made her face start to turn red. Her red lips were moist and soft. Ning Jumo's breathing became erratic as he calmly played with the dice with his fingers. I also want to make a name for myself, but my royal father doesn't want to see me do well. If I'm too powerful, he'll kill me. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes trembled slightly. She did not quite understand. Why? Ning Jumo smiled and narrowed his eyes. Because he's the emperor. What am I? I'm just a piece of trash that he abandoned in the filthy land. If I'm too powerful, he'll throw me back again. Wei Wei Bai's face was as red as the clouds, and her eyes were blank. He didn't seem to understand why the royal family was so cruel. Ning Jumo's heart softened as he whispered, "Ah Wei, everyone in this palace can't wait for me to die." Wei Wei Bai held her wine glass and didn't say anything. Ning Jumo smiled sadly. How could I forget? You can't wait for me to die so that your idiot husband can take over my body. Wei Wei Bai's fingers couldn't help but tighten, and the wine glass was crushed. Ning Jumo's expression changed. He immediately grabbed her hand and slapped away the wine glass shards. Her fingers were only red, but there was no wound. Ning Jumo heaved a sigh of relief. Then he frowned. Are you stupid? Why did you break the glass? Is the glass free? Wei Wei Bai looked at him for a while before sighing. If you can release my husband, we will be loyal to you in the future. We'll be your servants and palace maids. Ning Jumo saw the fear in her eyes. It was as if she already knew about her idiot husband. Chapter 1614. Actually, it was just her wishful thinking. Ning Jumo pretended not to see her final struggle. He knew that he couldn't force her to admit it. He and that fool were the same person. So Ning Jumo smiled. If you show your loyalty now, it'll be better than suffering outside if you really become my servant or palace maid in the future. Forget it, if you show your loyalty, I'll reluctantly accept you and that fool. She wasn't willing to face it yet. He could only spoil her. Because Bai Weiwei drank wine, the smell of alcohol rose, and her body softly lay on the table. The peach blossoms outside the window flew in and landed on her hair. Ning Jumo couldn't help but reach out to take it away. But he heard her mutter, Your Highness, Your Highness." Her tone was indescribably sad. Ning Jumo lowered his eyes and quietly pinched the petal. In the end, he liked fools more. But if he continued to be a fool, who would protect them? There were so many man-eating beasts in the palace. He couldn't be a fool. Suddenly, he groaned and a mouthful of blood spilled from the corner of his mouth. Wei Wei Bai was half drunk and about to fall asleep when she heard his painful groans. She immediately opened her eyes and saw Ning Jumo spitting out a large mouthful of blood. Wei Wei Bai hurriedly got up and immediately carried him to the bed and put him down. Then she shouted, Something happened to His Highness. Zheng Kuang came in and was shocked, but he knew what was going on. He immediately said, Miss, don't shout. His Highness is poisoned. With that, Zheng Kuang stuffed a red pill into Ning Jumo's mouth. Ning Jumo's breathing was better, but there were still traces of pain between his brows. Wei Wei Bai held his hand tightly. His fingers were so cold that she started to tremble. What's going on? Why is this happening? Who poisoned him? Ning Jumo was still enduring the pain and didn't make a sound. Zheng Kuang couldn't help but sigh. His Highness is also a pitiful person. He became a fool after being poisoned. To wake himself up, he ate another kind of poison to suppress it. But if this continues, his body won't be able to take it. This was the truth, and it sounded extremely cruel. Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled. Is he stupid? Zheng Qiao also knew what His Highness was thinking, so she went with the flow and told her. Yes, he became a fool when the poison took effect. Later, when the Empress wanted to kill him, he could only eat poison to suppress the poison and then recover his mind to fight again. Wei Wei Bai's eyes began to turn red. She seemed to be in disbelief, but she had to believe it. She could only hold his hand and say in a hoarse voice, "Your Highness. Your Highness." It was indescribably pitiful and lost. Ning Jiuma grunted a few times. After taking the medicine, his face finally looked better. What? Isn't Your Highness that idiot? Wei Wei Bai bit her lip. Her eyes were as red as a rabbit's, and her body was trembling. Ning Jiuma burst out laughing. All right, I'm just lying to you. There's no such thing as an antidote. I thought I was writing a script. Why are you so gullible? A tear fell onto the back of his hand. Ning Jiuma was stunned, but he saw that her face was full of tears. She was crying so hard that even her breathing was messed up. She was sobbing like a child. Ning Jiuma didn't know why, but his heart ached. He just wanted her to face the fact that he was the same person whether he was stupid or not. But when he saw her so sad, he couldn't feel happy. Ning Jiuma reached out and pulled her into his arms. Don't cry, he said in a hoarse voice. Don't cry, I'm fine. // Chapter 16:15. Wei Wei Bai sobbed but didn't say anything. Ning Jiuma's eyes were a little dry. He said, "What's so good about being a fool? I'm dirty and rolling on the ground. I don't even fight back when I'm beaten. Only you want me to be a fool. What's wrong with your brain? How can a fool give you happiness?" Wei Wei Bai grabbed the clothes on his chest and didn't say anything. Ning Jiuma sighed. If I lose the battle, I might really be a fool for the rest of my life. You will be happy then. Wei Wei Bai didn't answer. She just hugged him. She was afraid that he would be gone. She even hugged him until it hurt. Ning Jiuma knew that she must have suffered a big blow. He reached out and touched her satin-like hair, his eyes dark. He forced her to look at him step by step. It wasn't easy to look at him. Didn't her heart ache? Wei Wei Bai suddenly asked softly, "Isn't there an antidote?" Ning Jiuma immediately heaved a sigh of relief. The joy of his plan succeeding made the corners of his mouth rise. She really couldn't let go of him. He immediately suppressed his smile and pretended to be in pain. There is an antidote. It's in the hands of the person who poisoned me. Look at how miserable he was. Everyone wanted to kill him. Ning Jiuma suppressed his smug smile and desperately acted pitiful. Wei Wei Bai's heart ached for him. Even the strength of her hug became gentle. Ning Jiuma's expression also became gentle. He lowered his head and looked at her. His eyes were like stars falling. There was a different kind of purity and clarity. He thought that he liked her. He liked her very much. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 70. Suddenly, outside the door, Jing Qiao risked being beaten and said carefully, "Your Highness, His Majesty summons you." Ning Jiuma heard this and thought that it was about the concubine. But no, it was a summons, not an imperial edict. His eyes turned cold. "What's wrong?" Jing Qiao said, "His Majesty's head eunuch personally invited you and said that you will go with the girl." Ning Jiuma felt uneasy. He would go with Wei Wei Bai. It must be about the concubine. However, this was something that could be settled with an imperial edict. Why would he go personally? The emperor's body was in such a bad state that he didn't do much at all. It was not the dog-like emperor's style to mobilize so many people for his concubine. Could it be that the empress is up to something again? Ning Jiuma hid his gloominess between his brows, and his face was a little sharp. He said softly, "Okay, I'll bring Wei over." Wei Bai looked up in confusion. Her eyes were still red, and there were traces of tears at the corners of her eyes. Ning Jioma couldn't help but reach out and wipe away the tears at the corner of her eyes. "Do you want to come with me? If you go, you will be my concubine. I will not force you." Wei Bai was a little hesitant, as if she was struggling with something. She liked the silly him. Now that he was no longer a fool, she hesitated and did not dare to like him anymore. Ning Jioma saw through her thoughts. He suddenly reached out and clutched his chest, looking like he was about to vomit blood. Wei Bai immediately tugged at his sleeve nervously. "Your Highness." Ning Jioma's face was pale. "You should leave. I know you are unwilling. When father blames you, he will just chop off my head. It has nothing to do with you." These words were said so shamelessly. It was simply like a white lotus flower. And it was the black lotus type. Wei Bai and the system that was eating snacks calmly watched him act. She really wanted to say, "Your Highness, take care. I will leave first. Go ahead and chop off your head." However, for the sake of favorability, Wei Bai could only do it with him. She immediately couldn't bear to frown and hesitated. "It's so serious." "Then, let's go together." And Chapter 16:16. Ning Jioma trembled and wanted to laugh. There were benefits to being stupid. It was so satisfying to lie to her. Wei Bai sighed. Her acting skills were getting worse with each generation. Even if she wanted to laugh, she should wait until she succeeded before hiding and laughing alone. She thought that he couldn't tell. He had his back to her, and his smile was about to reach the back of his head. She was so happy that she became a fool. The two of them changed their clothes. Wei Bai was still wearing the pink and blue palace dress. Before she was conferred the title, she was just a palace maid. Ning Jioma's clothes were more complicated. When Wei Bai walked out, he was still looking for a belt. She picked up the belt on the plate out of habit and walked to him. "Stand properly," she said calmly. Ning Jioma immediately stood properly and looked at her with a smile. Wei Bai didn't say anything. She lowered her head seriously and helped him fasten the belt. He looked at the top of her head. A simple jade hairpin tied her hair into a bun, and her extra long hair fell behind her back. She was as delicate and pretty as a green willow by the water. Ning Jioma saw the newly bloomed begonia flowers beside her. He picked one casually and put it in her bun. Wei Bai finished fastening the belt and looked up in confusion. The red begonia flowers were like the blush on her face, cute and charming. Ning Jioma looked at her and a thought appeared in his mind. She was like a flower too. He couldn't wait to hold her in his hands and hide her in his sleeves. Ning Jioma slowly held her hand and said softly, "Don't be nervous later. It's your first time meeting the Emperor. I'll speak for you. He's not a good person. You don't have to care about that old bastard." These words were directed at the imperial father that he was referring to. He was simply an old tortoise with a vicious heart. He led her out, and the lanterns were lit all the way. They were going to sit in the sedan chair, but Ning Jioma refused. He held Wei Bai's hand and walked to the emperor's bedroom. The eunuchs and palace maids followed behind. Along the way, Ning Jioma patiently introduced her to the palaces on the road. And which place in the palace couldn't they go? Under the light, she stared at him curiously. Ning Jioma was mesmerized by her gaze. If it weren't for the crowd, he would have lowered his head and kissed her. "Your Highness, you really know a lot." Wei Bai lowered her head in embarrassment under his gaze. She lowered her eyes and said softly, Ning Jioma paused. She had praised him. She had always been nice to him when he was in a daze, but she finally softened her attitude towards him when he was sober. With his mood lifted, Ning Jioma felt that everything was good. He turned around and said, "Turn your back." All the eunuchs and palace maids stopped in their tracks and immediately turned around. Wei Wei Bai also turned around, and a warm kiss fell on her lips. She was stunned for a moment, but he had already left. His eyes were filled with joy. "Of course I know a lot. Follow me in the future and I'll teach you every day." Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips as a trace of hesitation appeared in her eyes. In the end, she softly replied, "Yes, Your Highness." Ning Jioma knew that she was going to stay in the palace with him. "Follow me and stay in the palace for the rest of your life." "Okay." He suddenly felt that the future was no longer dark, even if there were swords and knives on his body. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 80. The youth didn't know the taste of love. Once they met, the depth of their love would be unknown. The emperor's bedroom was brightly lit, and the palace maids and eunuchs were all on alert. It seemed like they were welcoming someone. When Ning Jioma held Wei Wei Bai's hand and came here, he instinctively felt that something was wrong. The palace had actually been specially cleaned. Chapter 16-17. There were peach blossoms of the season everywhere, as well as all kinds of rare and beautiful things. It was as if they were welcoming an important guest. Could it be that the dog emperor had an important guest tonight? Ning Jioma's heart was filled with all kinds of thoughts, but he suppressed them all. There was only a smile on his lips like a spring breeze. He led Wei Wei Bai into the palace. He saw the emperor sitting on the chair with his back straight. His hair seemed to have been dyed, without a single strand of white hair. Because the emperor was cultivating, his hair was always disheveled. But now, his hair was tied up. He was clean and wore casual clothes, but they were of a very young style. The black cuffs were embroidered with patterns. Under the light, the old emperor looked 10 years younger. If he didn't know that the pills had eaten away his body. Ning Jioma thought that he had really succeeded in cultivating. "Father, I'm here to greet you. This is Wei Wei." Ning Jioma pulled Wei Wei Bai and knelt down together. Ning Jioma knelt in front, half of his body blocking Wei Wei Bai, protecting her behind him. He said softly, "Wei Wei, greet father." Wei Wei Bai looked up and suddenly saw pink petals flying all over the sky. Her head was going to hurt again, and her eyes were going to go blind again. The system said, "The love of the emperor, 1,000 years of love, a love that will never change for 10,000 years. Wei Wei Bai said, "If you say any more, I'll kill myself." What kind of love of the emperor was this? It attracted an old man. She refused. But the love of the emperor couldn't be turned off. She looked up, and her mouth twitched. Finally, she forced herself to call out, "Father." The old emperor's body trembled, his fingers gripping the armrest of the chair tightly, as if he was enduring something. His eyes fell on her pink and young face, and all kinds of intense struggle and pain flashed across his face. Finally, the old emperor said softly, "Wei Wei." Ning Jioma's eyebrows jumped. Why did he feel that the dog emperor's voice was not right? He looked up and stole a glance, but saw that the dog emperor's eyes were fixed on Wei Wei Bai. His eyes were filled with tenderness and tenderness. Ning Jioma was a man who had just fallen in love. How could he not understand the naked look in her eyes? His pupils constricted and he instinctively blocked Wei Wei Bai. He then said loudly, "Imperial Father, this son remembers that there is still something I have to do. I will take my leave first." With that, Ning Jioma grabbed Wei Wei Bai's hand and immediately got up to leave. But behind him, the old emperor coldly said, halt. Ning Jiomo's eyes darkened. His murderous aura burst out, but he forced himself to endure. He couldn't help but tighten his grip on Wei Wei Bai's hand. Wei Wei Bai frowned. It hurt a little. The emperor suddenly spoke softly, which girl do you like? I'll help you find her. You don't like the prime minister's daughter, but do you like the princess? Ning Jiomo finally turned around. His eyes were a little red. Then, he pulled Wei Wei Bai behind him. He was thin, but very slender. He blocked the petite Wei Wei Bai behind him, not revealing a trace of light. If Ning Jiomo still couldn't see the desire in the old emperor's eyes, he would have lived in vain. If it was someone else, he might have laughed out loud. This dog emperor cultivated immortality every day to the point where he didn't recognize anyone. Although he doted on a few concubines, this dog emperor really didn't have any feelings for women. In the end, he really fell in love with a woman. He could use her. But this woman was Wei Wei Bai. He couldn't wait to gouge out the old emperor's eyes. Slash. Chapter 16-18. Ning Jiomo's expression turned cold. Under the flickering candlelight, he looked exceptionally sinister. He said word by word, "Father, I don't like other women." He held her hand and started to sweat. He wanted to ascend the throne and couldn't defend this dog emperor. One wrong step and his path to the throne would collapse. But looking at the emperor's red and wolf-like eyes, he thought of his gaze falling on the little palace made behind him. The hatred and crazed bloodlust that he had been suppressing surged to his head. He could make use of anyone in this palace. But he wouldn't use her as a stepping stone, and he wouldn't let other men look at her. This dog emperor took away everything from him. And he wanted to take away the only person in the palace who was good to him. The emperor's expression changed. He looked at Ning Jiomo gloomily. "Are you going to rebel against me?" Ning Jiomo gritted his teeth and the taste of blood spread in his mouth. Wei Wei Bai seemed to want to come out from behind him. He immediately turned around and said in a low voice, "Don't talk. Stay here obediently." Wei Wei Bai trembled and looked at him with a trace of confusion. She didn't seem to understand why they were at loggerheads. Ning Jiomo hoped that she didn't know anything. He didn't even dare to bet that if she knew that the emperor liked her, she would leave with him. Power was so tempting. The emperor had the best of everything. Which woman wouldn't be tempted? Even this dog emperor could be her father. The emperor saw him scolding Wei Wei Bai and got up angrily. He slammed the table and shouted, "Ning Jiomo, you're rebelling." Ning Jiomo turned around and immediately lowered his head and said respectfully, "Father, it's late. I won't disturb your rest. I'll leave with secondary consort Bai." He knew it was wrong. He knew that he should appease this old dog. But Ning Jiomo hated him so much that his eyes were about to bleed. He would have pulled out his sword and killed this dog emperor. Who would dare to covet his woman? Ning Jiomo held Wei Wei Bai's hand tightly and retreated step by step. He was as vigilant as a wolf guarding a treasure. He refused to let the emperor see Wei Wei Bai. Even one glance was too much. Then, he retreated a dozen steps, turned around, grabbed Wei Wei Bai into his arms, and dragged her out. It was as if he was afraid that someone would snatch away his little palace maid. Wei Wei Bai whispered, "Your Highness." Her innocent look made Ning Jiomo furious. "Do not make a sound." He had already provoked someone he shouldn't have, yet he still didn't know how to keep a low profile. Did she take a fancy to that old dog? Wei Wei Bai blinked her eyes as if she didn't understand what was going on between the father and son. Even if he knew, he had to pretend that he didn't. Ning Jiomo's eyes were as cold as knives. The emperor suddenly whispered, "Do you want to be the crown prince?" Ning Jiuma stopped in his tracks. He hugged Wei Wei Bai, his eyes fierce and sinister. His thin red lips were tightly pursed, as if he was pursing blood. His voice was cold and slow, with a frosty sharpness. Your son doesn't dare. After that, he didn't even turn his head and said calmly, your son will take his leave. Father, you can rest in peace. Ning Jiuma hurriedly pulled Wei Wei Bai and quickened his pace. The eunuchs and palace maids behind him couldn't keep up with his pace. When they returned to their own palace, Ning Jiuma turned around fiercely. Get lost. Zheng Kuang wanted to serve them when he saw them return, but when he saw this, he immediately changed his mind. He immediately retreated with all the servants. The door was closed. Ning Jiuma pulled the dazed Wei Wei Bai and pushed her onto the bed. // Chapter 16-19. His expression was dark and cold as he pressed down on her. He held both her hands with one hand and her chin with the other. Where did you hook up with this person? Tell me. Why did that dog of an emperor suddenly fancy her? Was it because they had already fallen for each other? Wei Wei Bai was in a daze. Her dazed eyes turned slowly before she looked at him strangely. What's wrong? She couldn't possibly say that the old emperor had suddenly become horny because of the love of the emperor. Ning Jiuma laughed coldly. What's wrong? Then his cold laugh turned into anger. Did you see that just now? That old dog looked at you as if he wanted to eat you up. He actually wants you. Wei Wei Bai was stunned. Then she forced a smile. How is that possible? I've never seen him before. Also, I'm not that kind of beautiful woman. How could the emperor suddenly fancy me? Ning Jiuma reached out and pinched her face. His eyes were red as he gritted his teeth and said, not beautiful enough. You're not beautiful enough. How could that dog of an emperor give me the position of crown prince in exchange for you? Tell me, aren't you beautiful? Wei Wei Bai's face turned red from the pinch. She said vaguely, let go of me, Ning Jiuma. Ning Jiuma frowned. Oh, Ning Jiuma. Did you fancy that dog of an emperor? You're not even calling him Your Highness and are calling him by his name. Wei Wei Bai couldn't stand this guy's childishness. She pushed him away with one hand. Ning Jiuma was pushed to the side of the bed by her great strength and almost rolled off the bed. He quickly supported himself and glared at her. Wei Wei Bai, you pushed me. Is it because you feel wrong to be my concubine that you want to be the imperial concubine? Bai Wei slammed her hand on the bed rail, and it snapped with a snap. Ning Jiuma's eyebrows jumped. This violent and direct strength. Was she an elephant? Wei Wei Bai was so angry that blood rushed to her face. What's wrong with you? I went with you to see that old bastard. From the beginning to the end, other than calling him imperial father, I didn't say anything else. Who did I hook up with? How did I hook up with him? Why don't you tell me? What could Ning Jiuma say? How would he know how that old bastard fell for Wei Wei Bai? Yes, the little palace maid was the cutest girl in the entire palace. But that old bastard must be sick in the head. How could he see her cuteness right away? Then, he would snatch it from him. Ning Jiuma looked at Wei Wei Bai. He couldn't win against her in a fight, but he couldn't win against her either. He was so angry that he pouted like a frog. Let's talk about it later. From now on, stay here and don't go out. But he wanted to take her out to meet someone. Even the emperor was seduced by her. If he took her out a few more times, his love rivals would have circled the palace 100 times. Wei Wei Bai sneered. Why? Am I a palace maid or am I your prisoner? I can't even go out. At most, I won't be a palace maid anymore. I can go out of the palace and farm to support myself. Ning Jiumo felt that she was speaking the truth. Her strength was comparable to that of a few cows. Farming was definitely a piece of cake for her. Ning Jiumo's expression turned cold. He couldn't suppress the fierceness in his chest. How dare you? I am your master. You have to agree to whatever I say. Wei Wei Bai held her forehead helplessly. What kind of straight man was he talking about? With this kind of conduct, he really wanted to chase after girls. Girls would probably be scared away. No matter how handsome he was, he wouldn't be able to stand such a waste. She refused to talk to this man. She was afraid that her IQ would plummet. Wei Wei Bai, I don't know what's wrong with you. Calm down yourself. I'm going to sleep in the next room. // Chapter 1620. How old was that old bastard? He still had the cheek to want Wei Wei Bai. He and Wei Wei Bai were a match made in heaven. Their ages were just right and they were equally good-looking. What did that old bastard have? Just because of the dragon throne. Ning Jiumo had never had such a strong urge to kill his father. He got up and covered Wei Wei Bai with a blanket. Then, he kissed her hair. It seemed that he could still smell the begonia scent from last night. After he walked out, Jing Qiao hurried over. Your Highness, bad news. The imperial edict is here. Ning Jiumo's eyes narrowed. His footsteps were heavy as he walked out slowly. It was the emperor's head eunuch. He held the imperial edict and smiled gently. I am here on His Majesty's orders. Your Highness King Ning, please accept the edict. Ning Jiumo felt that it couldn't be the concubine's order. That old bastard was going to snatch it. He pinched his fingers tightly and knelt down expressionlessly. The head eunuch opened the imperial edict and said a lot of nonsense. Finally, he said, Palace made by, beautiful on the outside but intelligent on the inside. She has a gentle temperament and is upright and dignified. She comforts my heart and is conferred the title of imperial concubine. Ning Jiumo slowly looked up. His face was expressionless, but there was killing intent in his eyes. The corners of his eyes were slightly red and cold. The head eunuch finished announcing the edict. Your Highness, accept the edict. Ning Jiumo slowly got up and reached out to grab the imperial edict. He was very calm, as if he would obediently do as he was told. The head eunuch also heaved a sigh of relief. His Majesty said that you will be in charge of conferring concubines. Your Highness, if you handle this well, your future will be limitless. After he finished speaking, he smiled and left. Ning Jiumo looked up at the back view of the eunuch. His eyes were cold. He said softly, Jing Qiao, burn it. Jing Qiao immediately knelt down. Your Highness, don't be impulsive. It wasn't easy for us to get to this point. As long as you become the crown prince, you will have a chance to snatch her back in the future. He felt that it was ridiculous. Why did the emperor suddenly like Wei Wei Bai? Even if a palace maid was likable, this was not the way to like her. In an instant, she had gone from a palace maid to a concubine. She was just one step away from becoming a consort. No matter how muddle-headed the emperor was, he had never acted so recklessly. He didn't even ask for the empress's permission before he issued the order. This was simply insane. But this madman is the emperor. If he burns the imperial edict, with the accusation of disrespect, everything that His Highness had planned would be ruined. Ning Jiumo lowered his head. Do you want me to give up on her? Jing Ting's lips trembled, but he still tried his best to persuade him. As long as we can hold on for a while longer, we will have a chance. You will become the crown prince and suppress the empress. Then, you can think of a way to make the emperor's poison act up. The court will still be yours. Ning Jumo's eyes were dark and gloomy. There was an indescribable deathly stillness in them. You're right. This is the best and safest way. I've already put in so much effort. One wrong move and I'll lose everything. Jing Kuang thought that he had thought it through. No matter how cute the little palace maid was, she couldn't compare to Jiang Shan. Ning Jumo suddenly said, but there's a faster way. Jing Ting hugged Ning Jumo's thigh and said with a trembling body, this is the last way. We can't take it. How could he not understand His Highness's words? He wanted to rebel directly. They had been planning for so long. How could they take such a risky path? They had been trembling in fear for so many years just to be able to rightfully take the throne. They didn't want to bear the infamy and directly rebel. Ning Jumo was silent for a while. Then, he suddenly smiled and kicked Jing Ting away. Slash. Chapter 1621. His expression was cold as he threw the imperial edict in his hand to his feet. Burn it to ashes, don't let me see it. I don't want the throne now, I want that old bastard's life. He had endured for so long, and he had come this far step by step. He could give anything, and he could compromise on anything. But that dog of an emperor had to step on his bottom line. If he retreated, he would be a coward even if he got the throne. Ning Jumo walked back and said coldly, if I rely on selling her to get the throne, then this empire is meaningless to me. Jing Qiao sat there in a daze. Crazy, they were all crazy. The emperor was crazy, so was Ning Wang. Once the path of rebellion was taken, there was no turning back. Rebelling in this situation was simply suicide. Wasn't Ning Wang able to use anything in the past? Why was it that he couldn't bear to part with Wei Wei Bai? Wei Wei Bai had just woken up and felt sore all over. The system said gloomily, your little retard is rebelling. Wei Wei Bai was still sleepy, doesn't he want to rebel every day? Ning Jumo was thinking about rebelling every day, that was nothing new. The system said, that old bastard came with an imperial edict asking you to be his concubine. The male lead is angry, so he didn't take the path of scheming anymore. He's already preparing to force you to abdicate. Wei Wei Bai said, only 85 favorability points, this little fool doesn't even want his life anymore. It was hard to believe how stubborn this guy was to have 100 favorability points. The system said, maybe he was abused too much and felt that his life was dark. A little light could make him live and die together. Wei Wei Bai said, you make me sound like a light bulb. Once this rebellion happens, my favorability points and the position of Empress will be gone. Men always regretted it after doing it. Ning Jumo had been scheming for so many years, and he could have gotten the throne smoothly. But because of her, he directly rebelled. Now, the rebellion would not succeed. So if he failed, he would probably take her out of the palace. After all, the dog hole in the cold palace was still there. But what about out of the palace? Would Ning Jumo regret giving up his empire for a beauty? Men were all demons who didn't mean what they said. After getting angry for a beauty, most people would regret it at some point. If he regretted it, his favorable impression of him would definitely drop. Once it dropped, not to mention the side quest, even the main quest would be finished. Wei Wei Bai calmly thought about what to do next. Then she said, now is not a good time to rebel. We need to give him some time to think. The system sat on the red string and swung. How do you want to be quiet? Wei Wei Bai, be his stepmother. Was this Jingjing? I feel like the male lead will calm you down. Host, if you want to cause trouble, just say so. Ning Jumo entered the room with his hands behind his back and saw Wei Wei Bai sitting on the bed. Her hair was messy and her face was blank. Although she was good at taking care of him, she couldn't take care of herself. Ning Jiomo reached out to take her dress and immediately helped her put it on without giving her a chance to speak. He didn't show the slightest bit of uneasiness or murderous intent. He calmly put a green cloak on her and put a hood on her. Wei Wei Bai looked at him strangely. What's wrong? Ning Jiomo, leaving the palace. Wei Wei Bai was stunned and then frowned. Why so sudden? Ning Jiomo smiled and lowered his head to kiss her lips. It's sudden. I suddenly feel like it's a very good thing to go farming with you. You go first. I'll pack up the gold, silver, and jewelry and then follow you out. Wei Wei Bai grabbed his wrist, her eyes cold. What happened? You haven't found the antidote yet. Are you going to wait for death outside the palace? Chapter 1622. You can search Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come over to search book, www.sashu.com, on Baidu to find the. He knew that she wouldn't believe him so easily. Ning Jiomo's eyes softened. I found the antidote, so I plan to leave the palace with you. I feel that there's no point in staying in the palace. It's better to go out and be free. This reason made her loosen up a little. Ning Jiomo reached out and hugged her. In a place where she couldn't see, his eyes were dark. His tone was light. Let's go out of the palace, get married, farm, and have a chubby baby. Wei Wei Bai, you're too indecent. Ning Jiomo, can you give birth to a baby properly? He stroked her abdomen. Maybe there's already a chubby baby here. Wei Wei Bai, you're wrong. You can't give birth, not in this lifetime. If you really want to give birth, you can choose between the system and the pillow boy. Ning Jiomo rambled on and on about the beautiful scenes of leaving the palace. In the end, he almost believed that he could leave the palace with her. But he knew that this world belonged to the person on the throne. If they didn't kill him, they wouldn't be able to escape no matter how big the world was. Ning Jiomo's eyes turned red. He said, wait for me to find you. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be convinced by him. She said gently, okay, I'll wait for you. Ning Jiomo took a deep breath and forced himself to let go of her. Then he said, Xing Qiao. Xing Qiao ran over with a bitter face with a bag. Ning Jiomo pushed Wei Wei Bai. Go, I'll catch up soon. Wei Wei Bai hesitated and turned back, only to see his smiling face and bright eyes. His youthful aura made him energetic. She wasn't confused anymore. She tilted her head and said to him, hurry up and catch up, Your Highness. Ning Jiomo smiled and nodded. Okay. Wei Wei Bai also walked out without hesitation. When her figure disappeared, Ning Jiomo's legs went soft and he sat on the ground. He reached out to cover his face. There were no tears, but his eyes were empty and violent. If he could leave the palace, it would be a good place to go. This palace had taken away too many things from him. Now that the most important person to him was gone, he had no qualms about starting a massacre here. Ning Jiomo slowly got up and was about to leave when he spat out a mouthful of blood. He felt a dull pain in his head. He knew that he was going to be a fool again. With trembling fingers, he stuffed the red pill into his mouth. The poison flared up more and more frequently. Ning Jiomo didn't care at all. After taking the medicine, he laboriously got up and walked out to arrange the following matters. Zheng Yi led Wei Wei Bai and trembled. What should they do? How could a direct rebellion succeed? Wei Wei Bai asked, Grandpa, are you cold? It's not cold, it's not cold. Bai Wei Wei looked at him with an indifferent expression, and he was a little scared. She suddenly smiled. We're going the wrong way. Shen Kuang said, that's right. It's the way to the cold palace. Although the dog hole is blocked, it's not solid. If you want to use it, you can still dig it out. Wei Wei Bai pointed at the palace behind her. That's where I should be. Shen Kuang was stunned. Wasn't that the emperor's palace? Wei Wei Bai turned around and looked into the distance expressionlessly. Let's go. Shen Kuang immediately knelt down and said anxiously, Miss, if you go, His Highness will definitely cut me into pieces. Wei Wei Bai said, if I escape, His Highness will definitely be cut into pieces by that old emperor. Is this the time to joke around? I heard everything when you guys were announcing the decree. Shen Kuang trembled. He didn't expect Wei Wei Bai to know everything. Wei Wei Bai said, just stay by my side. You don't have to go back, /. Chapter 1623. She would probably be skinned alive by Ning Jilmo when she returned. She went straight to the emperor's palace. Jing Qiao was anxious and pulled her cloak. Miss, I beg you. His Highness has sacrificed so much for you, please run away. Wei Wei Bai stopped and looked at him, but her eyes were clear and peaceful. If I run away, he will be the only one left in the palace. I said I would protect him, so there is no reason to abandon him halfway. Jing Qiao looked at her calm expression. Suddenly, he understood why Ning Jilmo would rather rebel than send her out. If there was someone in this cannibal palace who treated you so wholeheartedly, even if it meant risking your life, you would still protect this warmth. Jing Qiao's eyes were wet. He slowly got up and bowed. Then let's go, miss. Bai Weiwei smiled, turned around, and walked away indifferently. Jing Qiao followed behind her respectfully. System, woo-woo, I suddenly feel so touched. Wei Wei Bai, woo-woo, me too. System, I'm touched. Your target is an old man who is about to reach retirement age, and you're willing to do it. Wei Wei Bai, do what? If that old man dares to touch me, I'll break his head. System, we agreed on the position of Empress, you have to please. Wei Wei Bai, ugly, old, I'll go and see if I can get the position of Empress. If not, I'll run away. System, what happened to protecting Ning Jilmo and giving him warmth? What happened to keeping it from becoming a eunuch? The host didn't understand the pain of a man, that's why she didn't care about the side mission. The system could only look around to see if there was anything on sale in the supermarket that could make the old emperor see Wei Wei Bai. He gave her the position of Empress. After looking around, there really was one. When Plato smiled, the emperor would become a romantic spiritual lover. Together with the love of the emperor, they were a match made in heaven. The system took out its own money and secretly bought it. Then, he threw it directly onto the old emperor's head to purify his spirit. The old emperor paced back and forth, his emotions surging. He had found the love of his life, and his heart was filled with emotions. It was as if he had lived his entire life just to wait for her to come. Suddenly, the head eunuch outside the door said, Master Bai, you've come. His Majesty has been waiting for you for a long time. The emperor stood up and stared blankly at the door. She saw a girl wearing a green cloak slowly walking in. She raised her head to take a look. The sky was filled with red petals. The emperor looked at her from afar, as if they could see each other for thousands of years. He said, You've come. Wei Wei Bai said, I'm here. The system said, I'm here too. The emperor walked over helplessly and reached out to hold her hand. Wei Wei Bai was indifferent. She calmly put her hand behind her back, refusing to let him hold it. The emperor stiffened, but he didn't dare say anything. He gently said, I know you blame me. The position of Gue Fei is too low, but give me time. I will make you my empress very soon. The head eunuch at the door was speechless. Oh no, the emperor is really sick. Wei Weibai smiled. Okay, I'll wait for you. The emperor was so excited that his whole body shook. He said, I know you. You are so pure and beautiful. If I don't make you my empress, I will never touch you. Wei Weibai was speechless. This old emperor was too smart. His love for the emperor was probably due to his mental retardation. The download the at https://m/sashu.com button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 1624. Or was it really a family trait? He suddenly realized that the mentally retarded were really cute. Ning Jiumo spread out the map of the palace. His eyes were red as he coughed and planned how to kill his father and usurp the throne. Suddenly, a little eunuch rushed in and fell to the ground, trembling all over. Your Highness, His Majesty held 100-flower banquet. Ning Jiumo sneered. Just nice, we can catch them all in one go. Little eunuch, the young lady is also there. Ning Jiumo was confused. What young lady? Little eunuch, tonight's 100-flower banquet is prepared for the young lady to celebrate her becoming a concubine. After hesitating, the little eunuch added, the young lady went there willingly. Ning Jiumo was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, his vision turned black. The brush in his hand fell to the ground and the ink stained the map black. He asked softly, say it again. Little eunuch, the young lady went there willingly. Ning Jiumo slowly looked up and then gently curled his lips. He repeated, willingly. She willingly. Willingly to be that old man's concubine, willingly to stay in the palace, but abandon him. The little eunuch felt that His Highness's expression was very scary. Ning Jiumo lowered his head and looked at the ink-stained map. He stretched out his finger and slowly wiped the ink-stained areas. He wiped so seriously that his finger was stained black by the ink. And the map was also ruined. He suddenly laughed and then grabbed the map in his hand and slowly tore it. Behind the torn paper was his crazy and sinister eyes. He said softly, Wei Weibai, do you have to do this to me? Ning Jiumo threw the map away and put his hands on the table. He lowered his head and said coldly, go and prepare. The little eunuch was a little slow to react. Your Highness. Ning Jiumo threw a paperweight over. Go and prepare clothes. I'm going to attend that old man's 100-flower banquet. Except for the empress, everyone in the harem was a concubine. The little eunuch immediately left after surviving the disaster. Ning Jiumo stood there in a daze for a long time and was at a loss. He staggered a few steps and slowly walked out. In the empty palace, the decorations were gorgeous, and the begonia flowers were blooming beautifully. Ning Jiumo looked around in a daze, but he couldn't see anything. He suddenly felt a little cold. He struggled to sit on the chair and felt his limbs go soft. His eyes gradually became numb and hopeless. The traces of blood in his body were also covered by a kind of cold seriousness. In this palace, he was still alone. Suddenly, Ning Jiumo glanced sideways at the dagger on the table. He stood up, picked up the dagger, and stuffed it into his sleeve. If she dared to leave, he would rather kill her than let her marry the old emperor. Wei Weibai lowered her head and sewed the clothes. She had started sewing the clothes when Ning Jiumo was in a daze. The emperor sat far away, separated by a white line. Wei Weibai, men and women shouldn't touch each other. Don't cross this line. The emperor hurriedly nodded. Yes, Wei Wei. Wei Weibai said, that crown prince molested me. He's not a good person. I don't want to see him. That retarded crown prince heard that he had obtained the antidote, so his spirit was much better. The emperor's expression changed. That unfilial son is no longer the crown prince. I have already abolished him. It wasn't the first time that the crown prince had molested an imperial concubine. When he thought that his beloved would be bullied, the emperor immediately said, "I'll find a reason to kill that unfilial son." Wei Bai, then Wei Bai looked at the pink petals that only she could see. /save button. Chapter 1625. These were not the petals of the emperor's love. These were just powders of IQ reduction. Wei Bai couldn't help but ask the system, will the so-called emperor's love cause one's IQ to drop so much? The system said, those who fall in love are all fools. This prize was made with that as the basis. Wei Bai said, that's too stupid. He was even more stupid than Ning Jiumo when he was stupid. She was so obedient that she was embarrassed to mistreat the old man. Wei Bai wanted to test the bottom line of the emperor's IQ and said softly, I think King Ning is not bad. When the emperor heard this, his old tears almost fell. I know you don't love me, you only love Mo. I won't ask you for anything, I just want you to stay by my side. I will give you everything you want. Every time he saw her, he felt that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He even felt that he must have owed her in his previous life. So in this life, he would use everything he had to repay her. Wei Bai was sure that the emperor had lost his IQ. His brain was filled with pink petals. So Wei Bai reached out and asked him for the antidote to the poison in Ning Jiumo's body. The emperor immediately took out a small bottle. It was said that this thing was very difficult to refine, it was a real tonic. The emperor was a little guilty. This is all for now. I will give you more in the future. He had been taking pills for so many years and his body was still able to hold on because of this. The empress begged for a long time and only got 2 pills. Wei Bai weighed the bottle. There were about 7 or 8 pills in it. It was very good for Ning Jiumo's body condition. The empress saw her weighing the bottle and thought that she was not satisfied. She immediately said, I promise to give you 1 bottle every month. I still have 3 bottles with me. He was afraid that she would only stay by his side for the medicine, so he could only humbly give her a few bottles of medicine to delay her departure. The emperor had really become a role model who would give up everything for his lover. Wei Bai was very touched. She silently drew the white line further away from the old emperor so that he was 3 meters away from her. Ugly, still rejected. When the emperor went to attend the banquet, he was still talking about when he would depose the empress and make her the empress. Wei Bai felt that she was going to die soon. If the empress heard this, she would probably come and hack her to death. But I heard that the emperor has started to deal with the empress's family. Wei Bai expressed that the system's products were simply divine tools for brainwashing. She wore the clothes of a concubine and the golden bell that Ning Jiumo had given her was tied around her waist. She walked to the emperor's side. The 100-flower feast was held in the imperial garden, and it just so happened that the garden was full of flowers. When Ning Jiumo arrived, he happened to see Wei Bai standing at a high spot. She was wearing the pink formal dress of an imperial concubine. The hemline of her dress was wide and gorgeous. Her hair was tied up in a bun with a golden hairpin in it. Under the hanging vines, half of her face was as pink as snow. Her eyes were cold, and her every move was full of flirtatious charm. She seemed to have sensed his gaze and lowered her head to meet his. Wei Bai seemed to be stunned. She hesitated for a moment and seemed to want to continue walking. But the emperor suddenly walked out from beside her. He lowered his head and said something to her. Wei Bai's attention was drawn over. When she heard the emperor's words, she couldn't help but smile. The emperor said, Wei Wei, I will make him the crown prince later. Do you like it? Wei Wei Bai said softly, you decide. As long as you stay away from me. The emperor immediately cheered up. He felt that by Wei Wei Bai's side, she was the only one in his mind. /save button. Chapter 1626. You can search Transmigration System, Prince Charming, come to search book, www.sashu.com, in Baidu to find the S. He didn't even know how to be jealous anymore. Bai Weiwei felt that the old emperor's state was similar to that of someone who had taken ecstasy. Suddenly, she felt a chill run down her spine. She turned around and saw Ning Zhomo's eyes were like dark clouds, extremely violent. The favorability didn't drop. But Ning Zhomo was obviously turning black. The system reminded her, he has a knife on him. After he stabs the old emperor to death, he'll throw the cup and let his henchmen in ambush kill everyone. Ning Zhomo was going all out. He wanted to stop Wei Wei Bai from marrying the old emperor even if he had to die. Wei Wei Bai asked, the one who'll kill everyone, including me? The system said, looking at him, he'll probably stab you first. Of course, the adulterous couple had to be killed together. The system picked up its snacks. Ah, what a depraved and inhumane drama of a father and son cuckolding each other and killing each other. Wei Wei Bai, Ning Zhomo was still staring at her. She felt the dark gaze of death. Then, Wei Wei Bai turned around silently and walked back. The system said, Host, don't run away. You're the main character. The male lead had already shown his knife, but the host ran away. This love triangle was incomplete. Wei Wei Bai said, I'm going to the toilet. Ning Zhomo's terrifying gaze scared the hell out of her. The old emperor was still happily dethroning the crown prince and announcing Ning Zhomo as the crown prince. When Ning Zhomo heard his name, he slowly walked over and knelt down to receive the decree. The emperor's expression didn't look good. He smiled coldly, take it well, Mo. This is her existence, which is why you can come to this point. She will be your mother in the future, you must respect her. Ning Zhomo lowered his head and held the decree in his hands. The thing that he once wanted the most was now the heaviest humiliation. He lifted his eyelids, revealing a pair of cold eyes. He said softly, your son obeys the decree. Your son will, of course, respect my mother. The word mother was said softly and slowly. It was indescribably strange. The emperor looked at the empress. The empress's face was cold. He thought of his sweetheart. She was still waiting for him to get rid of everything and put her on the throne of the empress. The emperor didn't look at Ning Zhomo. What he needed the most now was how to kill the empress. Ning Zhomo also silently retreated and then turned to leave. He firmly remembered the direction she left in. It was not too late to chase after her now. After Wei Wei Bai has satisfied her physiological needs, she lifts her gorgeous but cumbersome dress and walks to the corridor. The system suddenly said, the male lead is coming with a knife. Wei Wei Bai. Then, she turned her head and saw Ning Zhomo rushing over aggressively from the end of the corridor. Every step he took was heavy. His clothes fluttered in the wind. His incomparably cold face carried a murderous aura. He felt that the triads were here to collect debts. Wei Wei Bai suddenly broke into a run. The system said, why are you running so fast? Explain to him that you have nothing to do with the old emperor. The old emperor was purified into a fool by Plato's smile. He was satisfied with Wei Wei Bai and couldn't think of anything else. Wei Wei Bai said, did you see Ning Zhomo's eyes? Without waiting for me to explain, he'll probably stab me to death. He's about to rebel. Such a rebellion was equivalent to suicide. With Ning Jumo's personality, he would think that she was cheating on him. He would definitely stab her to death and perish together with her. The system said, "No, you're stronger than him. Why are you running?" Wei Wei Bai stopped in her tracks. That was right. He was so weak, what was she afraid of? Slash. Chapter 1627. But just as she hesitated, a heavy body pounced on her from behind, like a hungry tiger pouncing on its prey. Wei Wei Bai reached out to push Ning Jumo away, but before she could touch him, his hand had already grabbed her belt, and the two of them rolled into a ball. They fell into a bush by the side of the corridor. The bush was very deep, and the two of them groaned at the same time. Wei Wei Bai's waist was hit, and she was in so much pain that she couldn't get up. Even if she had the strength, she couldn't use it. Ning Jumo's expression was sinister as he grabbed her belt and tied her hands tightly. Wei Wei Bai exerted force, and the belt split open again. Ning Jumo's eyes were bloodshot. He suddenly pulled the sachet at his waist and covered her mouth and nose. Wei Wei Bai was already prepared. She held her breath and didn't inhale too much. Her hands, which were tied with the belt, hit him hard in the face. Ning Jumo fainted. His hands loosened, and he fell. Infinite strength wasn't a joke. If it wasn't for Wei Wei Bai, she would still remember that this guy was her target. If she didn't show mercy, she would probably beat him into a retard again. Wei Wei Bai endured the pain and tried to get up from the ground. But Ning Jumo looked up with blood at the corner of his mouth. He looked at her gloomily and suddenly laughed softly. "Mother." Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and looked at him. Sadness appeared in her eyes, and she was afraid that he would see through it. She suddenly lowered her head. "Let's not meet in the future, Your Highness." Ning Jumo's smile didn't change, but his laughter was a little sad. "Don't meet? Mother. You're really something. You've bewitched that old bastard so much that he even promised you the position of Empress. Did you give him your body?" Wei Wei Bai froze. She looked up angrily, her eyes burning with anger. "Ning Jumo, can you not be so dirty?" "I didn't." Ning Jumo stared at her face, and his voice trembled. "Didn't? I don't believe it. That old bastard was so cruel and cold. So selfish. Besides the benefits of cultivation, he didn't care about anything else. She didn't even care about her child anymore. If she didn't do anything, how could that old bastard dote on her so much?" Ning Jumo held her face in his hands and touched her shoulders, waist, and thighs. His cold face was filled with rage and impatience. "Where did that old bastard touch you? Here? Or here?" Wei Wei Bai wanted to struggle, but Ning Jumo ignored her and hugged her tightly. "Hit me then. You're stronger than me anyway. Just beat me to death." In the end, under the fierce tone, there was actually pain and grievance. Wei Wei Bai didn't struggle but said helplessly, "Ning Jumo, are you an idiot? If you send me away and go rebel, what's the difference between that and suicide?" Ning Jumo's body stiffened. His fingers trembled as he placed them on her back. "So you sacrificed yourself to become my mother?" Wei Wei Bai didn't answer the question. Instead, she said softly, "I will protect you." These words were usually sweet and comforting to hear. At this moment, the air was filled with a heart-wrenching smell of blood. When Ning Jumo heard this, he really hated it. He hated it to the bone. He said in a low voice, "Do you need to make your own decisions?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him helplessly. She didn't seem to understand his words. But Ning Jumo's eyes were already red. He said word by word, who told you to make your own decisions? If you want to protect me, then use yourself to exchange for it. I can fight for the throne myself. I can kill the emperor myself. You're the only one who doesn't need to exchange for it. Why did you make your own decisions and erase all my efforts? Slash. Chapter 1628. How could he, after giving up so much for her? When he just wanted to send her away. She walked back by herself. And then marry that old bastard. This was a slap to his face and a stab to his heart. Wei Bai stared at him blankly. She forced a smile, her eyelashes fluttering slightly as tears fell. She tore open the belt in her hands inch by inch. Then, she grabbed his sleeve and took out the dagger from his sleeve. Her movements were so fast that Ning Jiumo couldn't stop her. Wei Bai put the dagger to her neck, her eyes cold. I made the decision on my own. If you want to commit suicide, you have to ask me if I agree. You must have ambushed someone today. Quickly retreat. Ning Jiumo really did have someone ambushing him. He just wanted to kill the old emperor. But after killing him, his path as the emperor would be completely cut off. Ning Jiumo had a splitting headache. He gritted his teeth and said, "Put it down." Wei Bai didn't give in at all. I want you to go back and be the crown prince. Only when he was the crown prince would he have more power to make arrangements. Even if he wanted to rebel, he shouldn't be so rash. Ning Jiumo laughed heartbreakingly. The crown prince who calls you imperial mother. Wei Bai looked at him coldly and finally said calmly, either I die here today, or you retreat and wait for another day to plot. Ning Jiumo's head hurt more and more. It hurt so much that his heart was about to split open. He suddenly hugged his head with both hands, his mind in a mess. The suppressant finally couldn't take it anymore and he became confused. Ah Wei. He muttered. He opened his eyes in a daze and saw Wei Bai holding a dagger to his neck. He blinked his eyes in confusion, and then he panicked. Ah Wei, what's wrong? He immediately rushed over and snatched the dagger in her hand. He held the dagger in her hand in fear. After snatching it with great difficulty, he immediately threw it far away. Wei Bai sat in the same place, watching the little fool anxiously hug her. Ah Wei, knives are not fun. They are not fun at all. He was so flustered that he didn't know what to do. Did he do something wrong and make Ah Wei angry? Wei Bai sighed faintly, Your Highness, do you listen to me? Ning Jiumo immediately nodded frantically. I'll be obedient, Ah Wei. Wei Bai forced a smile and took out the small bottle. This is very important. Take it and don't throw it away. Ning Jiumo gripped the bottle tightly. Okay. I won't throw it away. Wei Bai's eyes reddened as she gently reached out to tidy up his clothes. Leave this place with Jing Qiao later. He'll bring you back and take all the pills in the bottle. Ning Jiumo looked at her in confusion. Where is Ah Wei? Isn't Wei coming back with me? Wei Bai smiled even more gently. Of course I'm going back with His Highness. You go first, I'll come later. Ning Jiumo was a little hesitant and uneasy. Really? Wei Bai said, His Highness won't listen to me. Ning Jiumo immediately shook his head. I'll listen. Don't be angry. Wei Bai held his hand tightly. Then let's go. Ning Jiumo held the bottle and looked at her reluctantly. Jing Qiao was already hiding at the side. He immediately walked out and held Ning Jiumo's hand respectfully as they walked forward. Wei Bai stood in the grass, her dress fluttering as she looked at him calmly. Ning Jiumo turned back to look at her many times. He was like a lost child, looking at her anxiously. The system said, "It feels like an old mother sending her child to kindergarten." Wei Weibai asked, "Why isn't the favorability increasing?" The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1629. System, the host's heart is as cold as iron. You're actually thinking about favorability at this time. Are you the devil? Jing Qiao sent Ning Jiumo back. She watched him eat the bottle of medicine with her own eyes. After he finished eating, he was sweating all over and endured the pain for a while. He suddenly said coldly, "Jing Qiao." Jing Qiao immediately knelt down and kowtowed to the ground. Ning Jiumo leaned against the door with sweat all over his head. His face was pale. "Withdraw, everyone." Jing Qiao immediately said, "Yes, Your Highness." Ning Jiumo said, "Then return to her side and protect her." Jing Qiao immediately nodded. "Yes, Your Highness." Ning Jiumo asked, "Did that old bastard bully her?" Jing Qiao immediately said, "No, Your Highness. She didn't let the emperor get close to her every time. She even used a white line to separate them. The emperor didn't even touch her." Ning Jiumo couldn't believe it and couldn't help but smile. Jing Qiao said, "She said that the emperor is not allowed to touch her until she becomes the empress." Ning Jiumo covered his head with his hands. His handsome face had a hint of innocence and his smile was a little wanton. "That old bastard also has this day." His way was still his. After Jing Qiao left, Ning Jiumo's smile slowly disappeared. He hung his head weakly. There was a golden bell in his hand. It was from her belt. "Did you go to that old bastard just to get me the antidote?" Ning Jiumo's eyes were bitter and his heart ached. How could she be so protective of him? "Wait for me. If you want the empress position, I can only give it to you." He gently placed a kiss on the golden bell. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 90. When Wei Weibai heard the favorability, she finally pulled the blanket over and went to sleep in relief. The antidote was given to Ning Jiumo. His favorability overlapped with that of Fool Ning. Ning Jiumo became more and more clear-headed. Although Wei Weibai still liked Fool Ning, the palace was already involved in fighting. If Ning Jiumo was still a fool, sooner or later, he would die for no reason. If it was Ning Tsongming, she would be at ease letting him wander around. As long as Ning Tsongming did not rebel in advance, it would be very difficult for anyone to overthrow him. "Tongzi, help me keep watch. Remember to tell me when you see the old emperor." Although the old emperor's mind was not clear now. But who could guarantee that there wouldn't be a night attack? The system really wanted to say that after experiencing the baptism of its Plato's smile, the old emperor's mind would definitely be clean. However, this would expose the fact that it had a secret stash of money, so it still silently held on to this secret and its secret stash of snacks. For the next few days, Wei Weibai ate and drank well. It was because of that bottle of antidote. He was no longer in danger of becoming stupid. The system opened its heaven's eye and saw that the speed of Ning Jiumo's rebellion was increasing. It glanced at the old emperor, who was arguing with the empress. The former crown prince had gone mad again. Not only had he gone mad, he had even died. It was said that he was strangled to death in bed by a woman. It was a worthy death. The empress's family had already begun to decline. The old emperor didn't cultivate immortality, and only focused on fighting the empress. He wanted the empress to be finished, so that the position of empress could be vacated for the white moonlight of his previous life. The empress thought that her enemy was Ning Jiumo. In the end, the person she fought was the old scumbag emperor. The empress was miserable. The old emperor came to see Wei Wei Bai every day. He sat at the door, and after a few glances, he was chased away by Wei Wei Bai. The old emperor was happy like this, and like an old mangy dog, he would come and wait at a fixed time. Chapter 1630. Wei Wei Bai said, "There's no food here, eat elsewhere." Although she didn't see Ning Zhimo, Jing Qiao would deliberately talk about how His Highness was doing in front of her from time to time. Or from time to time, she would give her some small things. They were all exquisite jewelry and precious flowers that had been taken good care of. They were all carefully prepared by Ning Zhimo. The old emperor also gave them, but Wei Wei Bai didn't accept any of them. Anyway, she knew how scary the rewards were. The old emperor was hardworking and didn't ask for anything in return. This kind of affectionate and warm man would be the second male lead if he was more handsome. If he was ugly and old, he would be a wretched pervert. Ah, this world that looked at appearance. The system had lost all hope in Hong Xian. It was now relying on snacks and watching the drama series of the royal palace to pass the time. The host was lazy. She was too lazy to increase the favorability and was too lazy to mention the side mission. Eating and sleeping, sleeping and eating. She had gained 3 kilograms. If she wanted to lie to the male lead in the future, she wouldn't have the face to pretend to be haggard with this weight. Wei Wei Bai ate crispy fried meatballs and read novels to pass the time. You don't understand. The palace is in a mess now. I don't need to do anything other than sending messages to Ning Zhimo. She was now the little princess in the evil dragon castle. Ning Zhimo was the dragon slayer. The little princess didn't need to work. She just needed to wait for the dragon slayer to do it. If I do too much work, I don't know if my character will collapse, but Fool Ning's favorability will definitely collapse first. She was now in the old emperor's house. With Jing Qiao around, she knew that the old emperor didn't get close to her. So Ning Zhimo could still keep calm and his favorability was very stable. But if she did too much work, then Ning Zhimo would definitely suspect that she was hooking up with the old emperor. Did the old emperor touch something? Otherwise, how could she help him so much? For suspicious people, it was best for her not to do anything. As for the side mission, she didn't have to worry about it. Because the Empress and her family were locked up and waiting to be executed. After fighting for a lifetime, in the end, the old emperor was the one who killed her. The Empress was probably so angry that she was about to die. Wei Wei Bai leisurely ate the fried meatballs, lamenting that the days were really boring. Since no one was stirring up trouble, it was time for her to loosen up. Unknowingly, a month had passed. The old emperor hesitantly gave her a small bottle of antidote. He looked at the old emperor's resentful eyes. Wei Wei Bai drew the white line outside the door again. Stay away from me. How can we fall in love when we are of different ages? The old emperor stood at the door and poked his head out to say, Wei Wei, I want to make you a concubine, and then the empress. Wei Wei Bai, sure. The old emperor was sad. He wiped his tears and walked back. He must have delayed for too long, so Wei Wei Bai was unhappy. It had been so long, but she was still not the empress. It was all his fault. Therefore, the old emperor planned to continue fighting against those in the imperial court who opposed his choice of empress. What immortal cultivation and longevity! None of them were as important as his beloved. Wei Wei Bai waved her hand disdainfully. Every time the old emperor appeared, he would bring pink petals everywhere. The background of this young girl and the old emperor's face were simply unbearable. Zhang Yi stood outside the door and gently called, Miss, the imperial edict for conferring concubine is here. Come and receive it. Wei Wei Bai put down the sentimental novel and heard the system say, the male lead is here to announce the edict. Slash. Chapter 1631. She touched her face. It was too oily and smooth. How could she act like she was haggard? Wei Wei Bai rubbed her face, trying to make herself look thinner. The system added, "Stop rubbing. The more you rub, the fatter you look." Wei Wei Bai froze. Then, she rubbed the corners of her eyes. Her face was chubby, but her eyes were often filled with tears. Ning Jiumo would definitely think that she was pitiful if he saw her like this. Ning Jiumo waited outside the door, standing beside a cluster of orchids. His face was colder and thinner. His body was slender and straight, as cold as a sharp blade. He held the imperial edict in his hand. Of course, he knew what the old emperor was thinking. The old emperor wanted him to see that Wei Wei Bai was now his concubine. He didn't want him to have any delusions. Because the old emperor didn't cultivate immortality and didn't want to live forever. He just fought with others. This made the Daoist priest's poison completely useless. Ning Jiumo had no choice but to speed up his pace. Ning Jiumo knew the man's mentality too well. The old emperor wouldn't touch Wei Wei Bai now. But once Wei Wei Bai became the empress, how could the old emperor let her go? The more you loved a woman, the more you respected her. How crazy would it be in the end? Ning Jiumo pinched the imperial edict so hard that he wanted to crush it. Suddenly, there was the sound of footsteps behind him. Ning Jiumo immediately turned around, a trace of excitement on his face. It had been a month, but they hadn't seen each other. He saw Wei Wei Bai walk out of the door. She wasn't wearing the concubine's clothes, and her hair was tied up simply with a begonia flower. She was a little surprised to see him. "Your Highness," Wei Wei Bai kept this title at the corner of her mouth, with a hint of tenderness. Ning Jiumo looked at her from afar, focusing on her. His cold eyes gradually warmed up. The two of them didn't move for a while. Wei Wei Bai stepped out of the door first and walked in front of him. Ning Jiumo suddenly said in a low voice, "I've lost weight." Wei Wei Bai, Ning Jiumo's tone became pitiful. "Without you, I can't eat or sleep. There are so many things to do. The emperor, that old bastard, wants to tire me out. What's with this complaining tone?" Wei Wei Bai was about to comfort her when Ning Jiumo snorted, "Congratulations, Gue Fei Nyang Nyang, this is your imperial edict." With that, he tossed the imperial edict to Jing Qiao. "It's nothing valuable. I burned it after reading it." Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but say in a low voice, "Your Highness, bear with it for a while. It will get better in the future." "Ning Jiumo, I haven't seen you for almost a month. Do you miss me?" It was so straightforward. "Is idiot Ning back?" Wei Wei Bai touched her face that had gained a few kilograms. She really didn't have the face to say that she missed him so much that she couldn't eat or drink. Ning Jiumo was not blind. Wei Wei Bai went against her conscience and was about to say that she would gain 3 pounds if she missed him. But he suddenly lowered his head and kissed her cheek. Then he whispered in her ear, "Ah Wei, wait for me." From the moment she entered the palace, she was the one who had been protecting him. Now, it was his turn to protect her. Ning Jiumo straightened his body and looked at her deeply. Then he took a few steps back and suddenly turned to leave. He missed her. So even if he knew that it was a consort ceremony, he still came. After seeing her, his anxious and crazy heart calmed down. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 93. After Ning Jiumo went back, Jing Qiao also went to the door. Jing Qiao held a set of clothes. "Your Highness, this was made by the girl herself." Slash. Chapter 1632. When Ning Joma saw this, he knew that she had started making clothes for him when he was a fool. The clothes were dark blue, and the needlework was much worse than the ones used by the royal family. But Ning Joma hugged the clothes and was in a very good mood. He couldn't help but smile, but his chest suddenly hurt. Ning Joma put down the clothes and spat out a mouthful of blood. Although the antidote could cure part of the poison was too deep. If he was too emotional, the poison would still act up. Ning Joma's face was pale. He reached out to support his forehead and endured the pain. "Give me the medicine to suppress it." He didn't have the antidote, but he still had the medicine to suppress it. Jing Qiao frowned and looked worried. "Your Highness, you've taken part of the antidote. If you take the medicine to suppress it, it will be too destructive to your body." Ning Joma sneered. "I have too many things to do now. I can't take a wrong step. Without Ah Wei, he would become an idiot, a complete idiot." Jing Qiao saw that he was so determined. A trace of hesitation flashed in his eyes. In the end, he said, "Your Highness, hold on. I'll go find her." Ning Joma's expression changed. He was about to ask him to come back, but the severe headache made him unable to scream. He sat on the chair and almost curled up into a ball. "Why do you ask her to come back? Ask her to ask that old man for the antidote." Jing Qiao had always said that the old bastard respected her. He wouldn't get close to her. But that old bastard didn't even cultivate immortality. He was thinking of ways to get her the position of empress. How could that old bastard not want to get close to her? And he didn't want her to see him like a fool. Men were competitive. If there was no external threat, Ning Joma might not care. Anyway, she liked his silly look the most. But if the old emperor came, the threat would explode. If he really became a fool, he wouldn't be able to snatch her back. Ning Joma's mind was in a mess. He hugged his head and endured. Everything in front of him blurred. He suddenly heard the sound of the door curtain. He looked over and saw a slender figure running over. He moved his lips. "Ah Wei." Wei Bai rushed over and reached out to touch his face. It was covered in cold sweat. His forehead was boiling hot. Ning Joma looked at her in a daze and suddenly said, "Ah Wei, I miss you so much." He was half asleep and half awake, so he couldn't feel anything. All he could see was her anxious face. Wei Bai lifted him up and put him on the bed. Ning Joma's face was abnormally red. He had a fever. Wei Bai's expression turned cold. "Call the imperial physician." Jing Qiao immediately ran over. Wei Bai wanted to get a wet handkerchief for him, but Ning Joma grabbed her sleeve tightly. "Wei, where are you going? Don't you want me anymore?" he said pitifully. His beautiful and moist eyes were completely devoid of the fierceness and darkness he had when he was awake. "Wei Bai, you're being silly again." Seeing that she wasn't replying, Ning Joma hurriedly hugged her like a child, trapping her with his long arms and legs. "I was dreaming. I dreamt that you left me." Wei Bai felt that his body was scarily hot. She took out the antidote from the old emperor. Just as she was about to pour out the antidote, Ning Joma suddenly pushed her onto the bed and hugged her tightly. Even if Bai Wei was strong, when her hands and feet were bound, she couldn't break free for a while. Ning Joma was determined not to let her go. When he wasn't silly, he could still suppress it. When he was silly, all the paranoia in his mind ran out. Slash. Chapter 1633. Ning Joma hugged her tightly with tears in his eyes. "Ah Wei, I'm stupid. I'm useless. Don't go." When he was in a daze, he seemed to know a lot of things. It was very chaotic, but his mind was very clear that Ah Wei had been snatched away. He finally knew that she had once taught him to become strong, otherwise, she would be bullied. That was true. It was all because he was too stupid and didn't know anything. She had been snatched away and he couldn't do anything. Ning Jiuma cried in grievance. He was like a powerless child who had to protect his most precious thing. Ah Wei, I'm useless. I'm useless. When he turned into a fool, he vented his insecurity without restraint. Wei Wei Bai paused in her action of pushing him away. In the end, she couldn't reach out and put her hand on his back, comforting this giant preschooler like an old mother. Your Highness, I'm fine. I've always been here. Ning Jiuma didn't believe her. He shook his head so hard that his hair rubbed against her neck. It was itchy. He was like a large husky. Don't go. I can learn anything. Really? Ning Jiuma looked up in a daze. His wet eyes had a hint of madness. Wei Wei Bai looked at him and felt that the antidote was still useful. The foolish Ning and the smart Ning seemed to have intertwined. The foolish Ning in the past didn't have such sharp and terrifying eyes. Jing Qiao rushed over with the Imperial Doctor. Miss, the Imperial Doctor is here. He shut his mouth abruptly, and the two masters rolled together on the bed. Ning Jiuma immediately looked up and stared at those people. They were all bad people who had come to snatch Ah Wei away. He immediately got up, picked up an incense burner beside him, and threw it at Jing Qiao. Get lost. Who dares to come in without my orders? Jing Qiao jumped up in fright and ran back with the Imperial Doctor. He thought that he was going to be killed for disturbing his master. Wei Wei Bai also thought that Ning Jiuma had woken up. But the next moment, Ning Jiuma immediately rushed over and hugged her. The two of them rolled on the bed because of the momentum. Wei Wei Bai felt that Ning Jiuma had really turned into a giant dog. This attack power was truly terrifying. Ning Jiuma's eyes were innocent and pitiful. Ah Wei, do you think I'm learning well? They're all afraid of me. Wei Wei Bai's face was a little red from the heat of his body. She said softly, Your Highness, you're always the best. Whatever you do, I think you're the best. When Ning Jiuma heard this, he looked at her in a daze and suddenly revealed a childish smile. He was handsome to begin with, and the red mark on his face did not detract from his beauty at all. Even the spring flowers and full moon couldn't compare to his smile. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 95. Wei Wei Bai reached out and touched his forehead. Your Highness, you need to take medicine. Ning Jiuma held her hand nervously. He seemed to be uneasy about something, but his hand slowly loosened. Okay, listen to Wei. If Wei told him to take it, he would take it. But he didn't know why, but he had a clear understanding in his heart. The more medicine he took, the more likely he would never see Wei again. Wei Wei Bai took out the antidote and fed him one by one like candy. Ning Jiuma looked at her without moving his eyes, but he didn't resist at all and took the medicine. Wei Wei Bai saw that he had taken the medicine and comforted him to sleep. He held her hand tightly and leaned against the pillow, looking at her in satisfaction. Slash. Chapter 1634. He looked really silly, but his eyes were as bright as the Milky Way. Wei Wei Bai sat by the bed and accompanied him. Ning Jiuma's vision turned dark. His eyelids were very heavy and he wanted to sleep. Wei Wei Bai reached out and touched his eyes, saying softly, Sleep, Your Highness. You're too tired. He was indeed tired, but he didn't dare to sleep. He was afraid that Wei would be snatched away again. Ning Jiuma suddenly held her fingers tightly. Wei, can you tie a kite for me? It took time to tie a kite. She could only tie a kite here. He would sleep for a while, and she would still be by his side when he woke up. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before saying softly, "Okay, Your Highness. I'll tie a kite for you." Ning Jiuma smiled happily, then slowly closed his eyes and fell asleep. Wei Wei Bai felt that after taking so much antidote, idiot Ning had basically disappeared. He might be Ning Tsoming in the future. She looked at him silently for a while, then got up and walked out. Xing Qiao was still waiting with the imperial doctor. Wei Wei Bai said to Xing Qiao, "Take good care of him." Xing Qiao nodded, thinking that his girl was really good. Wei Wei Bai received a grateful look from Xing Qiao's little fan, then she went back. When she went back, the old emperor squatted at the door again. "Wei Wei, can I eat at the door?" Wei Wei Bai was tying a kite. She probably wouldn't see idiot Ning in the future. So she tied a kite in advance as a gift for idiot Ning. "Up to you." The old emperor didn't care at all about her perfunctory tone, and immediately set a table at the door with a smile. "Wei Wei, eat some too." Wei Wei Bai looked down at the kite. "I've eaten." The old emperor hurriedly ate a few mouthfuls of rice. "Then I'll eat faster." The sky was filled with petals, and the background was childish. A lonely old man, like a reincarnated hungry ghost, was eating. Eru reflects the moon. A lonely old man was chased to the door by his heartless children to eat leftovers. It was indescribably sad. The system couldn't bear to watch any longer. Too pitiful. The most tragic side mission target in history. Although the old emperor was a little old, his foundation was still very good. Otherwise, how could she have given birth to such a good-looking child like Ning Jiumo? It was just that she had a few more wrinkles on her face, and she always dressed up cleanly. In modern times, he would be a very charming uncle. Why did the host despise him so much? Wei Wei Bai sighed. "I had no choice." Every time she saw the old emperor, there were clusters of pink roses in the background. What's more, it was virtual petals that were scattered every day. She didn't know why, but she had the urge to beat the old emperor to death. Now that she was so strong, a single impulse would cause blood to splatter everywhere, so she told the old emperor to stay away from her. It was also to protect the side quest. Of course, the most important reason was ugly rejection. After the old emperor finished his meal, he dawdled and drank his tea at the door. He was also bitten by mosquitoes. "Ah Wei, let's find a time to make you my empress, okay?" he said carefully, afraid of being rejected. Wei Wei Bai thought for a while and decided to test the old emperor, to see if his IQ had broken through the bottom line. So she said, "I've been dreaming recently, I think someone wants to harm me." The emperor's expression turned cold. "Who wants to harm you?" "Wei Wei Bai, it's just a dream, but I think the palace guards are not strict enough." The emperor immediately said, "I'll change the head of the guards immediately. Next time you open the bookshelf, you'll see it. If you like." Chapter 1635. Wei Wei Bai, give it to the crown prince. Emperor, okay, I'll listen to you. Wei Wei Bai, then she silently said to the system, the emperor feels like he's retarded. With Ning Jiumo's ambitious appearance, if he was given the position of the leader of the imperial guards, he would immediately rebel tomorrow. The emperor saw that she was silent and said uneasily, "So, are you going to be the empress?" Bai Weiwei looked deeply at him with concern for the mentally handicapped and respect for the elderly and virtuous. "Yes, your majesty." The emperor was immediately satisfied. His time was over, so he reluctantly said, "Then I'll go back." Wei Wei Bai waved her hand. "Have a good trip." This plane was simply a fool's strategy. After the idiot Ning came an old idiot. Wei Weibai felt that this was a really comfortable plane. Any protagonist would feel that tomorrow was really beautiful in a world where their IQ dropped. When Ning Jiumo woke up, he stared at the beaded curtain in front of him in a daze. That familiar figure would come back again. Jing Kuang carefully came back. Your Highness, I heard the news. At the end of the month, the Emperor will confer the title of Empress to you. There were so many dynasties in this world. She had never heard of such a ridiculous thing. In just 1 or 2 months, a palace maid was going to be promoted to Empress. Just the sound of it was enough to shock people. But Ning Jiumo wasn't surprised. He just coldly played with the antidote bottle. His body knew that the poison had been diluted by more than half. Basically, he would take a few more antidotes. The poison in his body would be cured. Ning Jiumo suddenly looked up and said to Jing Kuang, "Open that dog hole and put our people into the palace in batches." Jing Kuang trembled. Your Highness. Ning Jiumo's eyes were as dark as ink and his voice was as cold as spring. We're not waiting anymore. Wei's kite is almost done. Jing Kuang hesitated a few times before finally saying, Yes, Your Highness. The spring flowers were flourishing and the rainy season gradually passed. When Wei Weibai was idling away her days, she also felt that the days flew by quickly. In the past, the system would try to persuade him, but it was hurt by the red line that couldn't be cut. It was now officially renamed Ling Ling No. 2, Salted Fish No. 4. The 2 leaders were too lazy to incur the wrath of men and gods. The dialogue was also the same as before. Host, the male lead is here, quick guide. Tongzi, I will immediately enter a life or death state to attack. Until now. Tongzi, I have to finish reading the novel. Host, I'm almost done with my snacks. I really want to lie down and read novels, eat pastries, and even have someone bring me the toilet. I really want to eat snacks and watch porn. My HP will automatically drop as I lie down. The host and the system were 2 big salted fish, but they suddenly found each other very pleasing to the eye. What a beautiful system of sharing weal and woe, and sharing the same soul. As for Ning Jiumo and the old emperor's affairs, in any case, it was a fight to the death. Wei Weibai and the system were too lazy to pay attention to it. It was finally the end of the month, and the coronation ceremony was about to be held. White Salted Fish finally perked up, because the side mission was about to be completed. There were only a few main missions left, and it would be full after a while. This plane was finally going to be over. A group of palace maids came in with clothes, and Wei Weibai chatted with the system while changing. I think the little fool is going to rebel. The system said, a lot of people were let in, but the old emperor seems to be on guard. The old emperor was only silly towards Wei Weibai, // Download the at https://m, Sashu. Calm. Chapter 1636. But when the pink petals weren't there, the old emperor was very clear-headed. Wei Weibai said, the little fool has also made arrangements for the imperial guards. The old emperor had given the imperial guards to Ning Jiumo. If Ning Jiumo didn't do anything, it would be a waste of his intelligence and ambition. The system glanced at it. Many of the male lead's men are mixed in, but half of them are still the old emperor's men. After all, how could they subdue the imperial guards in a month's time? But half of them were already very powerful. Wei Weibai patted her face. Okay, I should get to work. She was already fat. If she continued to be lazy, she would turn from a slender little fish into a fat whale. Let's go back after this. Wei Weibai said. The system flipped through the information and nodded. Okay, let me prepare. The red line was a hidden danger. It was too long. So the system tied a knot for the red line. This way, when the red line crossed the soul channel, it wouldn't be so restrained. The system packed up the red line and was about to tie a knot. Suddenly, it looked at the time of the side mission. Strange, it had never happened before. The side mission would appear for a lifetime. Usually, the longest side mission had to be related to the main mission. Why was there such a strange time rule? The system thought deeply and then remembered that it hadn't finished eating its raisins. When it watched the show later, it would have snacks again. Wei Wei Bai put on her clothes. The palace maids and eunuchs lined up in 2 rows and helped her step by step to the main hall. When she walked up the stairs, she heard the system say, "The male lead has become a wife-gazing stone and is looking at you in a daze." During this time, the old emperor and Ning Jiumo had been fighting to the death. Ning Jiumo didn't have a chance to see her. He could only ask Jing Qiao to bring her flowers. The begonia blooming period hadn't passed yet, so he brought her begonia flowers. Today, she also put a begonia flower in her hair. It was a gorgeous flower, making her face look as beautiful as the sunset. She looked up and saw Ning Jiumo standing at the door. He was wearing the crown prince's black robes and looked handsome. His face was still thin and sharp, but he had a delicate air. He smiled at her. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but smile. It was as if this was their wedding. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 97. The system was eating a raisin. The side mission was about to be completed. The host's mind was floating, teasing the male lead so casually. Her favorability towards him was climbing rapidly. The old emperor was anxious to see his empress and immediately rushed out of the door. She saw Wei Wei Bai and Ning Jiumo looking at each other. The old emperor seemed to have heard a desolate grassland tune. A green grassland replaced his pink petals. He looked desolately at Wei Wei Bai. She was his lover from his previous life, the one he loved in this life. It was all his fault for being born early. He was born in a different era from her. She let this unfilial son see her one step earlier. Once the ceremony was over, he immediately resumed his old path of immortality. He asked the heavenly master to get him some medicine that could make him young. Only then would he be a good match for the empress. As for this unfilial son, he would deal with him in the future. After the emperor made up his mind, he immediately beamed with joy. He walked down the stairs, followed by a group of eunuchs. Wei Wei, let's go in. The ceremony was about to begin. Wei Wei Bai's eyes turned cold again. She went up the stairs by herself, ignoring the old emperor's hand. The favorability had reached a critical point, but now they were holding hands. Slash. Chapter 1637. Didn't it hurt the favorability? She could only feel sorry for the old emperor. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the old emperor and saw the wrinkles on his face. The regret in her heart suddenly disappeared. This world that only looked at one's appearance was truly evil. Ning Jiumo stood in place, his gaze focused on her skirt as it slowly disappeared from his sight. His fingers bent as if he was trying to grab something, but in the end, he did not manage to grab anything. In the main hall, hundreds of officials were gathered. It was a dazzling sight. The emperor stood together with Wei Wei Bai, and just as they were about to announce an edict to officially confer the title, suddenly, a "chi" sound was heard. It was the sound of fireworks. The old emperor did make a lot of fireworks. They were supposed to be used during the banquet at night. Why was it so early? Wei Wei Bai said, "Tongzi, Ning Jiumo can't be rebelling this early, right? The best time should be at night. Now was not the right time to rebel." Moreover, her side mission had not been completed yet. The system said, "Rebel, they are all here." As soon as the system finished speaking, a wave of shouts came from all directions. Weapons clashed, and the screams of the palace servants rang out. All the fireworks flew up into the sky and exploded into blooming flowers. The old emperor's expression changed. That unfilial son. He immediately reached out to hold Wei Wei Bai's hand, intending to bring her to a safe place. But in the next moment, a sharp arrow pierced through the air and shot towards the old emperor's back. The old emperor felt the danger and immediately fell down. The arrow broke the edict about the empress. Wei Wei Bai turned around and saw Ning Jumo standing at the door in a black suit. He had a bow in his hand, and an arrow was nocked. His eyes were as dark as ink, cold as ice, and his thin body was as straight as a knife. When he saw Wei Wei Bai turn around, he could not help but smile. That cold look also made him look silly. Wei Wei Bai also smiled. She really wanted to strangle this bastard Ning Jumo. Wait a little longer, and her side mission would be completed. She just wanted to kneel down and scream. Couldn't Ning Jumo wait for a little while longer? Of course, Ning Jumo also knew that night was the best time to rebel. However, he would not allow Wei Wei Bai and the emperor's coronation ceremony to succeed. He should be the one to do it. What was that old turtle? When he saw that the old emperor was about to get up, he immediately drew his bow and shot an arrow, wanting to turn the old emperor into a sieve. Although the old emperor's body was weak, he was very fast when it came to escaping. He rolled and dodged the attack. He roared, "Men, men, kill this unfilial son." Although the pink flower petals retardation drug had caused his mind to be muddled. However, when it came to life and death, he immediately became clear-headed. Ning Jumo gritted his teeth and said, "Kill them." The surrounding soldiers roared, "Kill." The old emperor's men immediately guarded the entrance and started fighting with Ning Jumo's men. The imperial guards were evenly matched, and the civil and military officials also joined in the battle. The various forces were in chaos. On the other hand, Wei Wei Bai stood at the top and had nothing to do. She stared at the imperial edict and sighed to the system. "I've worked hard for more than a month, but I didn't get anything." System, damn, you've been eating and waiting for death for more than a month. However, it's a pity that you didn't complete the side mission. The system comforted her, "It's okay, the male lead killed the emperor today and took the throne himself. Don't you still have time to complete the mission?" To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the Save button at the bottom to record your reading record. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.